Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. The trip had started like any other university hiking expedition, planned, structured, and full of enthusiasm. Our professor had taken students into the Black Forest before, warning of its dense, tangled paths and unpredictable weather. But we weren't worried. We were armed with maps, GPS, and enough gear to handle anything. Or so we thought. 3 days in, something went wrong. A wrong turn, a misread map, and suddenly, we weren't sure where we were. The towering trees pressed, in on all sides thick with moss and shadow. The deeper we hiked, the quieter it became. No birds, no distant roads, just the crunch of our boots on damp earth. By the time we realized we were lost, rations were running low. Trail mix, dried fruit, a few protein bars. We tried foraging, berries, nuts, anything that looked safe. It wasn't enough. 2 experienced hikers, Daniel and Jonas, volunteered to scout ahead for signs of a marked trail or civilization. They returned hours later, pale and uneasy. "We found a settlement," Jonas said, "but it's not on the map." Curiosity outweighed caution. The next morning, we followed Daniel and Jonas through the trees. The village was unlike anything we expected. Small wooden houses sat nestled among the roots, their roofs sagging under years of moss. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys. It looked ancient, forgotten by time. The people were strangers still, pale, thin, dressed in wool and furs as if the modern world had never reached them. They spoke in murmurs, their dialect an old, slurred version of German none of us recognized. An elder, hunched and hollow-cheeked, stepped forward. When we asked for directions to the nearest town, he simply shook his head. Instead, they offered food, smoked meat, wild mushrooms, a thick, sour berry drink. Hunger overruled hesitation. We ate. But the way they watched us, unblinking, made my stomach tighten. That night, we camped just outside the village. And that was when the whispering started. At first, it was just the wind, soft rustling through the undergrowth, the occasional crack of a branch. Then came the grunts of wild boars in the distance, moving closer, rooting through the underbrush. We stayed near the fire, knives and hiking poles at arm's reach. Sometime past midnight, Daniel shook me awake. "There's someone out there." I followed his gaze to the edge of the trees. Lanterns, at least half a dozen, their glow bobbing in the darkness, just beyond the reach of our firelight. The figures holding them were barely visible, tall, unmoving, watching. Nobody spoke. Jonas and another hiker, Marco, stood slowly, gripping their pocket knives. "Who's there?" Jonas called. The lanterns didn't move. Then, as if responding to some unheard signal, the figures turned. One by one, they disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the dark. We didn't sleep after that. At dawn, we packed up and left. The village was silent. No smoke from chimneys, no movement between the houses. The door to the elder's home hung, slightly open, but when we peeked inside, it was empty. It was as if the entire settlement had vanished overnight. We hiked without stopping, desperate to put distance between us and whatever we had stumbled into. Hours later, we found a marked trail. A real one. It led to a small village with cobblestone streets and an inn. The locals barely looked at us as we stumbled inside, exhausted and shaken. The innkeeper, a broad man with deep-set eyes, poured us drinks and listened as we explained where we had been. When we mentioned the settlement, he frowned. There are no villages in that part of the forest. We exchanged uneasy glances. "No, we saw it," Daniel insisted. "The houses, the people, the elder." The innkeeper cut him off. That land has been empty since the plague. Hundreds died. No one lives there. His words sent a chill through me. They weren't ghosts, Marco said. We ate their food. We spoke to them. The innkeeper shook his head. You should have never taken their food. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I asked, who were they? The innkeeper sighed, pouring himself a drink. Old ways die hard. Some say the wood folk would still walk the Black Forest. Not alive, not dead. Just waiting. I thought of the lanterns, the silent figures watching us from the trees. I still don't know what we saw out there. But I do know one thing. We weren't supposed to find them, and they never wanted us to leave. I was born in Quito, Ecuador in 1978, the only child of two geologists who had dedicated their lives to studying the rugged Andean terrain. My childhood was shaped by the rhythms of the mountains, the endless stretches of volcanic rock, the scent of rain rolling in from distant peaks, the tremors that sometimes shook our research station at night. By the time I was 20, I had grown accustomed to balancing two worlds: my studies at the university in Quito and the remote field station my parents had established deep in the Andean foothills. The site was only accessible by a small plane, chartered from local pilots who knew the unpredictable moods of the mountains better than anyone. That October, I had flown back to the city for midterms, leaving my mother behind at the station while my father joined me for a few days. When we boarded the charter plane for our return, I was exhausted but eager to be back. I loved the field, station, the isolation, the towering cliffs, the sense of discovery that came with every new rock sample or seismic reading. The first half of the flight was smooth. I remember looking out over the vast green valleys below, tracing the winding paths of rivers that cut through the mountains. But then the storm rolled in. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and the wind howled against the fuselage. The pilot's voice was tense over the radio, trying to reroute. Then a deafening crack. An engine failure. I barely had time to register what was happening before we plunged into the storm. I woke up to pain. My entire body ached, but my leg was the worst. A searing, unbearable pain that shot through me with every movement. The sky above me was a shifting gray, clouds pressing low against jagged peaks. I tried to sit up, but my head throbbed, my vision swimming. The wreckage of the plane was scattered across the mountainside, the fuselage split open like a gutted animal. Smoke curled into the cold air, the acrid scent of burning fuel mixing with the crisp mountain wind. I called for my father, for the pilot. No one answered. I don't remember much of those first few hours, only fragments. The sharp sting of wind against my face, the taste of copper in my mouth, the realization that I was alone. My leg was broken. The bone had not pierced the skin, but I knew without a doubt that it was fractured. My forehead was sticky with blood, though the wound didn't feel deep. I forced myself to move, dragging my body toward what little remained of the cockpit, hoping for supplies. There was nothing. No radio, no signal flares, no food. Just me, the wreckage, and the vast, indifferent mountains. Survival became my only focus. I had no choice but to splint my leg using pieces of broken luggage and torn fabric. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through me, but I knew if I didn't find shelter, I wouldn't last through the freezing night. On the third day, I spotted something in the distance, a small weathered structure tucked into the slope of a ridge, a shepherd's hut, abandoned but intact. Reaching it took almost a full day, my progress agonizingly slow. Inside, I found a few rusted tools, a blanket, and, miraculously, a small supply of dried corn and coca leaves. The coca helped dull the pain, allowing me to rest. I collected rainwater in an old tin and foraged for anything edible. I recognized a few medicinal plants, remnants of what my parents had taught me. Using crushed herbs, I treated my wounds, desperate to keep infection at bay. Time blurred. I tracked the days by the sun, by the aching hunger in my stomach. I dreamed of rescue but knew the odds were slim. Then, on the 12th day, I saw them. A group of villagers, moving cautiously toward the hut. They must have thought I was a ghost. The villagers took me to a small mountain clinic where the doctor, an older man with kind eyes, examined my injuries. My leg would heal, but it would take time. My head wound had scabbed over, though the dizziness still came, in waves. Through broken Spanish and gestures, I explained who I was, where I had come from. Word spread, and soon, the authorities arrived. The crash site was located, my father's remains recovered. I was too weak to return with them, but I didn't need to. I already knew the truth. He hadn't survived the impact. Days later, I was flown back to Quito, surrounded by reporters, doctors, and distant family members who barely recognized the hollow version of me that stepped off the plane. Through it all, one thought remained. I had survived, but I wasn't sure why. I carried the mountains with me. Even after my body healed, the Andes never left my mind. I saw them in my dreams, in the way I studied fault lines and tectonic shifts. I returned to my studies, switching my focus entirely to seismology. If I could understand the Earth, if I could predict its violent shifts, maybe I could prevent another tragedy. Years later, I stood on the shores of Scotland, scattering my father's ashes into the wind. He had always spoken of returning to his homeland, though he never imagined it would be like this. I built a life, a career. I founded a research center dedicated to earthquake prediction, pushing for advancements in early warning systems. People called me a survivor, a miracle, but I never felt like one. Not until years later when a documentary filmmaker reached out. He had heard my story, fascinated by the endurance of the human spirit. I hesitated before agreeing, because for the first time, I realized my survival wasn't just about me. It was about the ones who never made it out of the mountains, and the ones who still listened to their call. There's something about empty places that draws me in. I've been photographing landscapes for years, chasing solitude, documenting the stillness of forgotten places, abandoned farms, ghost towns, decaying industrial sites, places that had once been full of life but were now left to crumble under time's weight. I never thought I'd find a place that didn't want to be remembered. The quarry was supposed to be just another location. I had seen it marked on an old map while researching places on the outskirts of town. No roads led directly to it anymore, just a narrow, overgrown path cutting through the trees. It was perfect, or so I thought. By the time I arrived, the sun had begun to slip behind the hills, casting long shadows through the forest. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp stone and stagnant water. I climbed over a rusted-out fence, my gear slung over my shoulder, and followed a crumbling gravel path until the land dropped off suddenly. The quarry was massive. A deep, yawning pit carved into the earth, its walls sheer and jagged, streaked with rust-colored stains from years of mineral runoff. Pools of black water collected at the bottom, perfectly still, reflecting the sky like shards of broken glass. I stood at the edge, taking in the silence. There were no birds, no wind, just the weight of the stillness pressing against my ears. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like something was waiting. I shook the thought off, setting up my camera. The light was perfect, fading gold against the stone, the reflection in the water like an oil painting. I took a shot, then another. I adjusted the focus, looking through the viewfinder, and that's when I saw it. A ripple in the water. Not the kind caused by wind or falling debris. This was deeper, slower, like something was moving beneath the surface. I lowered the camera, squinting at the pool below. The water was still again, perfectly still. But just as I lifted the camera for another shot, I heard it. A sigh, faint, distant, but unmistakable. It echoed through the quarry, low and drawn out, like the last breath of something deep underground. I turned sharply, my pulse hammering in my throat. No one was there, just empty rock in the dark water below. I exhaled, forcing myself to relax. It was probably my own breath catching in the still air, amplified by the walls around me. That's all. But when I checked the camera, my stomach twisted. The screen was glitching, pixels smeared across the display in jagged, broken lines. I clicked through the images, heart pounding. Most were fine, sharp, clear shots of the quarry's cliffs. But then I reached the last one I had taken. My breath caught. The reflection in the water. It wasn't the sky. It wasn't the cliffs. It was moving. The image was stretched, distorted, like something had risen from the depths just as I had pressed the shutter. Something tall and shapeless, its outline unraveling at the edges like smoke caught underwater. And in the very center of the frame, the ripple. I stared, my hands tightening around the camera. The screen flickered violently, then went black. A crack splintered across the lens filter. The camera shut off. I stepped back, my pulse a sharp, erratic beat against my ribs. This wasn't a normal malfunction. This wasn't dust in the lens, or a battery dying too soon. Something had broken it. The side drifted through the quarry again, closer this time. I didn't wait. I slung the camera over my shoulder and headed back the way I had come, my boots crunching against the gravel too loudly in the heavy silence. As I climbed the hill, I glanced back one last time. The water was still, but something about the quarry felt emptier than before, like something had been there, and now it is gone, or worse, it wasn't gone at all, it was just somewhere else. I spent the drive home trying to convince myself that nothing had happened. Equipment fails all the time. Cameras glitch, batteries die. I'd been working in low light, in a place heavy with moisture. Maybe something shorted out. Maybe the eye crack in the filter had been there before and I just hadn't noticed. But I knew that wasn't true. And worse, I knew I wasn't alone in the quarry, not in the way people usually mean it. Not another hiker. Not some forgotten vagrant sheltering in the ruins. Something else had been there, and the camera had seen it. The cracked lens sat heavy in my bag on the passenger seat, my fingers drumming anxiously against the wheel as I replayed the moment over and over. The ripple, the sigh, the warped reflection. The memory twisted in my gut like an old, slow sickness. By the time I reached my apartment, the sky had gone fully dark. The drive had taken longer than it should have. I barely remembered the turns, the empty road stretching too long in my mind. I pulled into my spot and shut off the engine. Then, with a deep breath, I reached for the camera. The weight of it in my hands felt different, wrong, like something had shifted inside. I held it carefully, carried it inside, and set it down on my desk before turning on my laptop. I needed to see the images on a bigger screen, to prove to myself that I'd imagined the movement in the water, that the shape, whatever it had been, was just a trick of the light. I pulled out the SD card, inserted it into the reader, and opened the files. At first, everything seemed normal. The first few shots were sharp, the quarry's cliffs glowing gold in the fading light, the dark pools of water, the long shadows stretching over the rocks. Then I got to the last image. I leaned in, my breath slowing. It wasn't just the reflection that was wrong. The whole image was off, like the file itself had been corrupted, but only in certain places. The sky was fractured, split into jagged shards. The trees lining the top of the quarry were blurred, their outlines stretched unnaturally, bending toward the water. And the reflection, I felt my stomach lurch. The shape was clearer now. Not a figure, not a shadow. Something rising from the depths, its body sewn together from pieces of the broken image. It had no face, no real form, just an absence. A hole in the world, leaking into the still water, and at the bottom of the image, near the edge of the pool, footprints, wet, dark smudges leading away from the water, leading toward me. I slammed the laptop shut. The air in my apartment felt different now, thick, unmoving, like the quarry's silence had followed me home. I turned on every light. I checked the locks. I stood in the center of my living room, staring at the camera, at the black screen, at the fractured lens that had seen something it shouldn't have. And then a faint, distant sigh drifted through the room. Not outside, not from the street below. Inside, somewhere behind me. I turned, heart hammering. Nothing. Just my apartment. Just the same four walls I had lived in for years. But it wasn't the same anymore. Something had followed me home, and it was waiting. I didn't sleep. I tried. I turned off the laptop, put the camera back in its bag, and crawled into bed. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. That distorted shape rising from the water, stitched together from broken pieces of the world. And the footprints, wet, smudged, leading toward me. At some point, exhaustion won. I drifted into a fitful, uneasy sleep, my mind circling the same dark images over and over. Then I woke to the sound of dripping. At first, I thought it was part of the dream, but as I blinked, pulling myself out of sleep, I realized the sound was real. A slow, steady drip. 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 I sat up, heart pounding, ears straining in. The dark. The bathroom. The sink. I forced myself out of bed, my pulse heavy in my throat, and flicked on the hallway light. The apartment was silent. The bathroom faucet was dry. The kitchen sink was dry. I checked the ceiling, the vents. Nothing. But the sound hadn't stopped. It was behind me now, in the living room. I turned slowly, my skin crawling. There, on the floor, in the center of the room, a puddle, dark, viscous, like the stagnant water from the quarry. I felt something tighten in my chest, a slow-growing nausea that rooted me to the spot. The water was thick, not quite liquid. It clung to the wood floor in a way that didn't seem right, as if it wasn't entirely part of this world. And the smell, earthy, deep, like something that had been buried for a long, long time. I knelt down, hesitated, then reached out. The moment my fingers touched it, the lights flickered. A sound rattled through the room, low, distorted, like a voice speaking underwater. I scrambled back, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The puddle hadn't been there before, there was no leak, no explanation. And then I saw them, footprints, leading away from the puddle, leading toward my desk, toward the camera. I didn't move, didn't breathe, then ever so slowly, the camera turned on by itself. The screen flickered. A fractured image appeared, static, distorted shapes, black and white and wrong. And in the center of the frame, a shape. A dark, shifting mass, barely visible against the static, but I could feel it watching me. It wasn't standing there. It was clinging to the ceiling. My breath caught in my throat. The camera glitched again, the image breaking apart. And then a whisper, low, garbled, the same sound I had heard at the quarry. A faint, dragging sigh, and I knew this thing had followed me home. I grabbed the camera, yanked out the battery, and shoved it back in the bag. The screen went dark. The puddle on the floor was gone. But I could still feel it. Somewhere in the room. Somewhere watching. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I spent the next day trying to convince myself that none of it had happened. The puddle. The footprints. The camera turned on by itself. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I had worked too many late nights, spent too much time staring at grainy images and broken pixels. Maybe the stress of the quarry had messed with my head. But the feeling didn't leave. The sense that something else was here. I kept the camera shut off, shoved deep in its case, but I still felt watched. Every shadow in my apartment seemed too deep. Every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made my skin crawl. And then there was the smell. Faint, almost imperceptible. That same damp, earthy scent. Like stagnant water. Like the bottom of the quarry. Like something that had been disturbed. I opened all the windows, hoping the fresh air would clear it out. It didn't. By nightfall, I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. Then, the dripping started again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, heart pounding as I followed the sound into the living room. The puddle was back, but it was bigger this time, stretching out across the floor, soaking into the cracks between the wooden planks. And the footprints, they weren't leading away from the puddle anymore. They were approaching it, like something had walked in from the hallway. I stepped back, gripping the phone tighter. I should have left. I wanted to leave, but something was pulling me forward. A horrible sinking sensation, like when you stand at the edge of a steep drop and feel an unnatural urge to step closer. The puddle rippled. The smell grew stronger. And then, a sigh. A wet, rattling exhale as if something just below the surface was breathing. I nearly dropped my phone. The puddle darkened, turning into something thicker, something that moved in slow, undulating waves as if something beneath it was shifting. And then, the surface broke. A shape began to rise. My body locked up. It wasn't a reflection this time. It was coming through, dark, featureless, reaching. I stumbled backward, gasping, but my foot slipped on something wet, another puddle. But this one wasn't on the floor. It was on the wall. The drywall was weeping, thick black water oozing down in slow, sticky rivulets. I turned, heart hammering, and saw more of them, seeping through the ceiling, the windows, the door frame, like the whole apartment was drenched in something unseen. Then, a soft knock at the door. Not urgent, not demanding, just waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Another knock, and a whisper. Not from outside. From behind me. So close I could feel the breath against my ear. Let me in. The phone flickered in my hand, and then the lights went out. The power failure plunged everything into absolute blackness. Not the kind of darkness you adjust to. The kind that presses in, thick and suffocating. The kind that feels occupied. I stood frozen, gripping my phone, but the screen had gone black. The battery had been at 60% not 5 minutes ago. Now, nothing. The knock came again. Soft, patient, and the whisper, "Let me in." Not loud. Not demanding. Just a breath against my ear, as if someone stood behind me. I turned instinctively, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. And for a second, just a second, I saw something. A shape, tall and shifting, like water struggling to hold form. A face, blurred and unfinished, flickering in and out of focus like a corrupted image on a screen. And the eyes. There weren't any. Just two empty hollows that seemed to pull the darkness inward, swallowing it, stretching it. I couldn't move. Couldn't blink. Then, the knock came again. This time from inside the apartment. I ran. I don't even remember unlocking the door. Only the sensation of breaking through a barrier, like pushing through the surface of deep water. The second I crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The silence broke. Street noise. Distant traffic. The hum of a passing car's headlights flickering against the apartment walls. Normal sounds. I turned back. My apartment door was wide open, the darkness inside stretching deeper than it should have, and the puddle was still there. But now it was spreading across the threshold, inching toward me like a slow tide. Something moved within it. A shape coiling beneath the surface, watching me. And then, a hand began to rise, fingers dripping with that same thick black water, reaching. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and then I ran. I never went back. The next morning I broke my lease over the phone. I didn't explain. I didn't even go back for my things. I left the apartment as it was, door locked, curtains drawn, camera still shut inside its case. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was done. But the quarry wasn't done with me. For weeks I felt it lingering, not following me, not exactly, but waiting. I stopped taking photos. I couldn't bring myself to lift a camera, to look through a lens, to frame an image. Because what if I saw something that wasn't supposed to be there? What if it saw me back? Then one night my phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number, just a single image. A photo of my old apartment door. And beneath it, a puddle. Dark. Spreading. And within it, a shape rising through the surface. I stared at the screen, pulse hammering, the familiar nausea clawing up my throat. Then another message. A voice recording. I almost didn't press play. I should have deleted it, thrown the phone away. But my hands moved on their own. I lifted the phone to my ear, and I heard it. Not static, not distortion, just the faintest, wettest whisper. Let me in. I dropped the phone, and for the first time since I left, I heard it again. That soft knock at the door. The first time I saw a glimmer, I was 13. It happened in my childhood bedroom, a small space with a slanted ceiling and a single window that overlooked my mother's vegetable garden. I was lying on my back, staring up at the old glow-in-the-dark, stars I had stuck to the ceiling when I was younger. Then movement. Not outside, not in the periphery of my vision. It was in my room, near the closet. A brief shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. But the air was still. Cold even. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, it was gone. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Just tired eyes, a trick of light. My mother was always warning me not to read under the covers with a flashlight, claiming it would ruin my vision. Maybe I had pushed my luck. But the glimmerings didn't stop. They came in brief flashes, barely noticeable, always at the edge of my vision, sometimes in my bedroom, sometimes in the hallway, once even in the backyard near the old oak tree where my father had built a swing when I was little. I never spoke about them. What would I even say? That I was seeing things that weren't there? That sometimes the air itself seemed to bend, shifting in a way that made my stomach turn? So I ignored them, and for a long time, that was enough. By the time I moved into my own apartment, I had all but convinced myself the glimmerings had been childhood hallucinations. My mind, back then, had been more impressionable, too much time spent alone with books about ghosts and interdimensional rifts. Then the raven came. I hadn't meant to keep it. It wasn't a pet, not in the traditional sense. It had simply arrived, settling on the railing of my balcony one morning with an air of quiet expectation. At first, I assumed it was injured. It didn't fly away when I approached, only tilted its head, watching me with those dark, intelligent eyes. I left it water, a bit of leftover bread. The next day, it was still there. By the end of the week, it was clear I had been adopted. I named it Poe, of course. Cliché maybe, but it fit. The bird was massive, larger than any raven I had ever seen. When it spread its wings, I swore I could hear the air shift around it like the beating of something far larger. But the strangest thing was its behavior. For the first few months, Poe was calm. It would sit beside me while I had my morning coffee, occasionally making low, croaking sounds as if responding to my thoughts. Then, one night, everything changed. It started with the corner, the one near the bookshelf in my living room. Poe had never paid much attention to anything inside my apartment before, but that night, as I settled onto the couch with a book, he suddenly launched himself from the perch by the window, his wings beating frantically. He landed on the floor, facing the bookshelf, his feathers puffed. Then, he screamed. A sharp, piercing cry so loud that it sent a jolt of fear straight through me. He flapped his wings violently, his beak snapping at the empty air near the bookshelf. My breath caught. Poe? He didn't stop. His talons scraped against the wooden floor, his beak striking at nothing, again and again, his whole body shaking, with what could only be described as terror. I stared at the space he was attacking. There was nothing there. But then, the air shifted. For the briefest second, I saw it. A flicker. A shimmer, twisting the space just above the floor like water disturbed by an invisible hand. The exact kind of glimmering I hadn't seen in years. Cold dread washed over me. Poe let out another shriek, lunging one last time before abruptly stopping. His body slumped, his wings trembling as he stumbled backward. Then, with a final rasping croak, he flew, straight into the kitchen, as far from that corner as he could get. I sat frozen, heart hammering. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it, that the way the air had twisted was just an illusion, some kind of trick caused by my own movement, or the way the light from the lamp flickered. But Poe had seen it too, and he was afraid. That night I didn't sleep, because for the first time since I was 13, I wasn't just wondering if the glimmerings were real. I knew they were, and now they knew I had seen them. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, that brief flickering shimmer near the bookshelf, twisting the air like something unseen had moved through it. Poe's reaction had been worse than mine. He didn't return to his usual perch by the window. Instead, he wedged himself into the furthest corner of the kitchen, his feathers ruffled, his sharp eyes locked on the living room as if expecting something to move. The apartment felt different now. Like the walls had shifted just slightly, pressing in at unfamiliar angles, like I wasn't alone, even in the silence. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overtired, that ravens were just weird birds and sometimes fixated on things, for no reason, but I didn't go near the bookshelf. Not that night, not the next morning, and not the day after. By the third day, I noticed something else, the stillness. The apartment had always been quiet, but this was something different. An unnatural silence that made the air feel thicker, heavier. My ears strained for something, anything. A creak of the old wooden floors, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustling of a breeze through the curtains. Nothing. It was the kind of silence that listened. I kept the lights on even during the day, moving quickly from room to room, my nerves on edge. Poe still wouldn't go near the living room. He perched on top of the fridge now, watching me with something close to human concern. And then, the mirrors started acting strange. It was subtle at first. I would catch glimpses of movement that didn't match mine, a hesitation, a slight delay in the reflection when I turned my head. The light in the mirror always seemed just a little dimmer than it should have been, as if the glass held on to the darkness for a second longer than reality. But it wasn't until Poe reacted that I truly began to panic. I was in the bathroom, standing at the sink, splashing water on my face. The apartment's silence pressed in around me. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the hand towel, my reflection shifting with me. Then, Poe shrieked. A full-throated, panicked cry from the kitchen. My head snapped up to the mirror, and I wasn't alone. For a fraction of a second, I saw it. Movement in the reflection, something tall and shifting just behind me, glimmering at the edges like heat rising off pavement. My stomach lurched. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. The bathroom was empty. The door still slightly ajar, leading to the hallway. I turned back to the mirror, breath coming fast. My reflection stared back, but the air behind me looked wrong. Darker. Too still. I backed out of the bathroom, my pulse drumming in my ears. Poe was in the kitchen doorway, wings half spread, his entire body rigid. His dark eyes flicked toward the hallway behind me, then back to me, as if trying to warn me of something I couldn't see. I grabbed my phone with shaking fingers and texted Theo. "Can you come over?" Theo arrived 20 minutes later. He stepped inside, glanced at me, then at Poe, who hadn't moved from his defensive stance. "Okay," he said slowly, setting his keys down on the counter. "What's going on?" I exhaled shakily, rubbing my arms. "Something's wrong with this apartment." Theo raised an eyebrow. "Like, wrong how?" I hesitated. How was I supposed to explain this? That my bird had screamed at an empty space? That my mirror had shown something behind me that wasn't there? That I had spent the last 3 days feeling like the walls were breathing? Instead, I said, "It's the air, the silence, and the mirrors." Theo frowned, stepping toward the hallway. "What about them?" "I don't know." My voice felt small, Things don't feel right. Theo glanced at Poe, who still hadn't moved from his defensive posture. Your bird's acting weird. No shit, I muttered. Theo sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, let's test something. He walked past me toward the bathroom. My heart lurched. Wait. Too late. He flicked the light on and stepped in. I hovered in the doorway, every nerve in my body screaming at me to pull him away. Theo met his own reflection in the mirror. For a second, everything seemed normal. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand. The reflection followed, but there was a hesitation, a delay of maybe half a second. Theo's face paled. He took a step back. Did you see that? My throat was dry. I nodded. Theo turned to me, his jaw tightening. What the hell is wrong with this place? I had no answer, but I knew one thing. The glimmerings weren't just tricks of light. They were here, and they were watching us. Theo didn't stay long after that. He tried to brush it off at first, but I saw the way his hands trembled when he picked up his keys. Maybe it's an issue with the lights, he said, his voice forced and casual. Or your mirror's old and warped. I didn't argue, I wanted to believe that too, but I also knew that mirrors don't hesitate, and light doesn't warp into shifting figures that dissolve when you turn around. After Theo left, I sat on the couch, staring at the bookshelf, the one where Poe had lost his mind. The space felt empty, but I didn't trust it. I could feel something lingering in the air, something pressing down on my skin in a way that wasn't quite touch, but wasn't nothing either. Poe was still in the kitchen. He hadn't moved since Theo arrived. His feathers puffed, his sharp black eyes locked on the hallway. A thought crossed my mind, something I hadn't considered in years. Maybe I needed protection. I wasn't religious, never had been, but my grandmother was. She had been the kind of woman who carried rosary beads in her pocket and tucked iron, nails into the corners of rooms to keep the bad things out. When I was younger, I thought it was just superstition. Now I wasn't so sure. I dug through an old box in my closet, one of the ones I had never fully unpacked after moving in. Inside, beneath a stack of childhood drawings and mismatched socks, I found it, a small, delicate silver cross. It belonged to my grandmother. She had given it to me when I was 10, pressing it into my palm with a knowing smile. You might need this one day, she had said. At the time, I had laughed. Now my fingers curled around the cold metal like it was my last lifeline. I placed the cross on the bookshelf. I didn't know what else to do with it. I just knew that I wanted it there, in the spot where Poe had screamed at nothing. Then, on a whim, I grabbed a piece of chalk from my junk drawer and drew a symbol on the floor. A crude protection sigil I had seen once in a book about warding off spirits. The moment the chalk met the wood, the air shifted. Not in the way it had before. This was different. The air became thick, pressing down on me like the weight of deep water. The oppressive silence in the apartment stretched, deepened, swallowing even the faintest background noises. For the first time since I had moved in, I felt like I had made a mistake. I stepped back, my pulse hammering. The silver cross on the bookshelf trembled. The lights flickered. Then, crack. A sharp splintering sound echoed through the apartment, like something had snapped inside the walls. Poe let out a shriek from the kitchen. I turned just in time to see him launch himself from the fridge, his wings beating furiously as he crashed into the window. I ran to him, panic clawing at my throat. Poe? He didn't stop. He flung himself against the glass again, his talons scraping, his beak pecking wildly at the window frame, like he was trying to escape, like he knew something was coming. A cold, awful dread filled my stomach. I turned back toward the bookshelf and saw the glimmering. Not a flicker, not a trick of light. A figure. Tall. Serpentine. Its shape twisting like smoke, its body shimmering in and out of focus, as if it wasn't fully here, but trying to be. A deep, suffocating cold filled the room. My breath fogged in the air. Poe screeched again, flapping, wildly. I couldn't move. The glimmering figure shifted, its long, warped body flickering toward me, stretching across the space too quickly. And then, the cross fell from the bookshelf. The silver hit the wooden floor with a sharp clink. The moment it did, the air snapped back to normal. The cold vanished. The figure was gone. Poe collapsed onto the floor, his sides heaving, his beak slightly open as he gasped for breath. I stood there, shaking. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then, with a trembling hand, I picked up the cross. The metal was ice cold. I swallowed. Hard. The protection symbols hadn't worked. If anything, they had made it worse. The cross stayed with me after that. I didn't put it back on the shelf. Instead, I kept it in my pocket, the metal pressing into my palm whenever I tightened my fist. It was a reminder, a tether to reality. Because after what I had seen, what Poe had reacted to, I needed something solid to hold on to. Something real. For the next 2 days, the apartment was still. Not peaceful, just still. I didn't hear the usual creaks of the old wooden floors. The heating vents didn't hum. The air felt stretched, like a rubber band pulled too tight, waiting for something to snap. Poe wouldn't leave the kitchen. I tried coaxing him out, but he refused, pressing himself into the farthest corner, his black eyes tracking something I couldn't see. I thought about leaving, packing a bag, staying at Theo's for a few nights. But some instinct told me that it wouldn't matter, because the glimmering wasn't tied to this apartment. It was tied to me. The mirrors were the next to change. It started subtly, delays in movement, shifts in lighting that didn't match the room. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But on the third night, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something. My reflection's eyes. They were a fraction of a second too slow. I moved my hand experimentally, watching in growing horror as my reflection followed. Just a moment too late. I froze. My reflection didn't. For a heartbeat, it kept moving without me, its hand lowering back to the sink just as I stood motionless. A sharp electric terror crawled up my spine. I turned around immediately, searching the bathroom behind me. Nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was exactly where it should be, breathing heavily, face pale, eyes wide with terror. Had I imagined it? Had I? A deep guttural croak echoed from the kitchen. Poe. I ran. I found him facing the hallway, his feathers puffed, his beak slightly open in a low warning sound. He was staring at the bathroom mirror through the reflection in the glass kitchen window. I barely had time to process that before. The lights flickered, not normal flickering, rhythmic, purposeful. One long pulse, a pause, then 2 short flickers. My breath hitched. It felt like a pattern, a message. Then, the bathroom mirror cracked. The sound was sharp, splintering through the silence like a bone snapping. I felt something in the air shift. I ran back toward the bathroom, Poe flapping wildly behind me. The mirror was intact, no cracks, no fractures. But I had heard it, I knew I had. Poe landed on my shoulder, his talons digging into my sweater. He let out a low, uneasy croak, his body stiff as he stared into the mirror. I followed his gaze. At first, everything seemed normal. Just my own pale reflection staring back. The bathroom behind me untouched. Then, in the farthest corner, a flicker. Not my reflection. Not an object shifting. Something else. Something watching. My stomach twisted. Then, a movement that didn't belong to me. A shape, glimmering just behind my shoulder in the mirror. I spun around, nothing. I turned back to the glass. The shape was closer now. I stumbled back, nearly dropping Poe. The lights flickered again. 3 slow pulses. I didn't wait. I grabbed the towel from the rack and threw it over the mirror. The moment it was covered, the air snapped back to normal. The flickering stopped. The pressure in the room lifted. Poe relaxed slightly, though he still let out a low, rasping sound of warning. I pressed a shaking hand to my forehead. The glimmering hadn't just been watching, it had been trying to reach me. I left the apartment the next morning, not permanently. I didn't even pack a bag. I just grabbed my coat, slipped the silver cross into my pocket, and walked out the door before my fear could trap me inside. Poe didn't come with me. He had flown out onto the balcony at dawn, perching on the railing, staring off into the distance like he was waiting for something. I didn't try to move him. Some instinct told me he knew more than I did, that he was preparing for something I couldn't see yet. I made my way to the subway, forcing myself to breathe, to think rationally. But nothing about this was rational. The mirrors, the flickering lights, the symbols failed to protect me. The glimmering figures are getting closer, and the terrifying truth settling deep into my bones. It wasn't just inside my apartment anymore. It had followed me. The train car was nearly empty when I boarded. Just a handful of exhausted commuters, heads bowed over their phones, lost in their own worlds. The morning rush hadn't started yet, and the silence of the car was thick, filled only with the hum of the tracks beneath me. I sat near the back, pressing my cold fingers into my pockets, feeling for the silver cross like it might still hold some kind of power. Then, the air shifted. A slow, suffocating weight pressed against my chest like the gravity in the train had suddenly doubled. The lights overhead flickered. Once. Twice. Then, the doors hissed open at the next stop. No one got on. Not at first. Then, it appeared. A figure. Tall. Serpentine. Its form flickered like heat haze, shimmering as it moved onto the train, its shape bending unnaturally, like it wasn't meant to exist in this world. My breath caught. The air froze, turning sharp, brittle. The few people in the train car didn't react. No shifting glances, no uneasy movements. Because they didn't see it. But I did. And the moment my eyes locked onto the glimmering shape, it turned its head toward me. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I knew. If I didn't move now, I wouldn't be able to. The glimmering stepped forward. The overhead lights buzzed loudly, the entire train car flickering with an unnatural rhythm. One long pulse, a pause, two short flickers, the same pattern as before. A message. I staggered to my feet. The train jerked beneath me, the movement almost knocking me off balance. I reached for the metal pole beside me, trying to steady myself, my pulse hammering. The glimmering was closer, now. I could see the way it moved, shifting between forms, its shape almost human, then stretching, elongating into something wrong. The train began slowing. I didn't wait for it to stop. As soon as the doors hissed open, I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept moving, pushing through the underground station, shoving past confused commuters, my lungs burning. Somewhere behind me, I swore I heard something. A faint electric hiss, like radio static, like whispering. I didn't look back. I burst onto the street, into the cold morning air, my legs shaking. And then, a sharp, piercing caw. I turned my head toward the sound. Poe. He was perched on a lamppost near the entrance of the station, his dark feathers ruffled, his eyes locked onto me, as if he had been waiting. I exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against my chest, trying to slow my racing heart. Poe let out another caw, flapping his wings once before taking off, circling overhead. Then slowly, he flew in the direction of my apartment. A cold realization settled over me. It wasn't over. I could run. I could leave the apartment, the mirrors, the bookshelf, the symbols that had failed. I could disappear into another city, another life. But the glimmerings weren't tied to that place, they were tied to me. And now I had acknowledged them. I wasn't just seeing them anymore. They knew I could see them. And soon, they would make sure I understood why. I took the job because I needed the money. That's how these things always start, right? It wasn't about chasing thrills or proving how tough I was. I didn't care about ghost stories or local legends. I just needed a paycheck, and the listing said night security guard, textile factory. It seemed easy enough. I had worked security gigs before, mostly empty office buildings or construction sites. This was just another job, another long night walking circles around a place no one cared about anymore. At least that's what I thought. I didn't ask why an abandoned factory needed security. Maybe it was a liability thing, or maybe someone higher up still had hope of selling the property. Either way, I didn't care. I signed the papers, showed up at 10:30 p.m., and met the guy I was replacing, some older man named Gary, who looked more than happy to be leaving. "This place gets weird at night," he muttered as he handed me the keys. I chuckled. "What, like rats and busted pipes?" Gary didn't smile. He just shook his head. "Just do your rounds, check the cameras, and..." He hesitated. "If you hear the looms, don't go looking for them." That gave me pause. "The looms?" He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "You'll see." Then he left, and I was alone. The Caldwell textile factory had been built in the early 1900s, back when the town had relied on cotton mills and manufacturing. By the 80s, production had slowed, and by the early 2000s, the place shut down completely. Now it was just a shell. 3 floors of dust-covered machinery, broken conveyor belts, and offices filled with rusting file cabinets. The basement, more like a sub-basement, was a maze of storage rooms and old equipment that had been left to rot. The only light came from the dim security lamps mounted throughout the halls, casting long, flickering shadows. I had a routine. Start at the sub-basement, check for squatters, leaks, or anything out of place. Work my way up through the first and second floors, making sure no doors had been forced open. End on the 3rd floor, which was mostly just empty, space where the factory's largest looms had once been. By 11:30 p.m., I had completed my first round. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I returned to the security office, a small room near the main entrance with a desk, a row of monitors, and a dented filing cabinet. The cameras were old, black and white, and grainy, but they covered most of the building. I leaned back in my chair watching the static-filled feed. Nothing moved. No squatters, no broken windows, no signs of activity at all. But the silence, it felt unnatural. I tried to shake it off. This was just a job, a paycheck. Still, Gary's words lingered in my head. "If you hear the looms, don't go looking for them." I almost laughed at myself. What did that even mean? At 2 a.m., I did my second round. Still nothing. The sub-basement was a nightmare to navigate. Tangles of rusted pipes, crates covered in dust, and narrow hallways that led to locked storage rooms. The first and second floors were the same. Silent, undisturbed. Then I reached the 3rd floor. The air felt heavier up there. Not colder, exactly. Just denser. I walked past the old production floor, past the towering machines, my flashlight, beam cutting through the dust. Then, a sound. Faint, rhythmic, like something softly clacking in the distance. I stopped, heart hammering. It sounded like weaving, like an old-fashioned loom. I turned, shining my flashlight across the vast, empty space. Nothing, just rusted beams and peeling paint. The sound faded. I exhaled, shaking my head. Rats. Or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Either way, I finished my rounds and went back to the office. The rest of my shift passed without incident. At 6 a.m., I clocked out and left. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had heard something I wasn't supposed to. The next night, the factory felt different. I couldn't explain it, but the air was heavier, the shadows deeper. Everything was the same during my first patrol. Empty halls, dust-covered floors, nothing out of place. But during my second round, as I reached the second floor, something caught my eye. A shadow. Not my own. It moved. I turned my flashlight toward the far end of the hall. Nothing. Just an old storage door. But I knew what I saw. Then, movement. A flicker of darkness, vanishing into that storage room. My pulse spiked. I walked toward the door. It was locked. I checked the handle, firmly sealed, rusted shut. Whatever I had seen had gone through it. I took a step back, swallowing hard. Then, from behind the door, a soft, rhythmic clack, 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 like the sound of a loom. I ran. I didn't finish my rounds that night. I locked myself in the security office and stayed there until sunrise, barely breathing. When my shift ended, I left without looking back. And as I walked to my car, I heard it again, faint, almost like the wind. A whisper, a woman's voice, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who or what was watching me. And for the first time, I wondered if Gary had been telling the truth. Maybe I shouldn't have gone looking for the looms. I should have quit that night. I should have handed in my badge, packed up, and never set foot in that factory again. But when my phone buzzed the next afternoon, I answered. It was my supervisor. "How's the Caldwell shift treating you?" I hesitated. My gut told me to tell him everything, the shadow, the locked door, the whispering voice. Instead, I forced a laugh. Uneventful. "Good. You're covering solo tonight. We'll have another guard joining later this week, someone to split shifts with you." I swallowed hard, alone. I thought about making an excuse, but I needed the paycheck. And maybe, just maybe, last night had been nothing. A trick of exhaustion, a coincidence. I told myself that over and over as I drove back to the factory. But when I pulled into the empty lot, my stomach twisted, because the building was waiting for me. At 10:45 p.m., I stepped inside, locking the entrance behind me. The factory's silence was heavier tonight. It wasn't just empty. It felt abandoned in a way that went beyond dust and decay. I checked the monitors. Nothing moved. Still, I hesitated before starting my rounds. Last night, I had seen something, a figure, slipping through the storage room's locked door. But maybe it had been a shadow. A flicker of my flashlight against the grime-covered walls. I repeated that thought with every step as I made my way through the sub-basement. Everything was as I had left it. The old machinery sat in rusted silence, the storage crates untouched. I climbed back up to the first floor. Still nothing. By the time I reached the second floor, I had almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Then I saw it again. The shadow moved at the end of the hall, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I stopped cold, gripping the handle of my baton. It slipped through the storage room door. I exhaled sharply. The door was still locked. But I wasn't going to run this time. I was going to prove to myself that it was nothing. I walked forward, boots heavy against the old tile floor. My fingers closed around the handle. It was ice cold. I gave it a sharp tug, locked. I exhaled, just like before. There was no way anyone or anything had gone inside. I turned to leave. Then, from the other side of the door, a soft rustling sound, like fabric brushing against wood. My body locked up. I turned back toward the door, pressing my ear against the old wood. Silence. Then, the whisper, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. The voice was close, too close, as if someone was standing right on the other side. I forced my breath to steady, reaching for my radio. "Base, this is Elias," I murmured. "I've got possible trespassers on the second floor storage room B. Need permission to investigate." Static. A long, empty pause. Then my supervisor's voice crackled through. "Copy that, Elias, but that room is supposed to be sealed." I swallowed hard. "Yeah," I whispered. "I know." I didn't sleep the next morning. I spent hours watching the security footage from the night before. And that's when I saw it. At 2:43 a.m., a figure moved across the second floor hallway. Tall, shadow-thin, it stopped in front of the locked storage room. Then, it passed right through. Not opened the door, not forced it. Glided through. My stomach churned. The footage glitched slightly as it moved. Its shape blurred, shifting in and out of focus like it wasn't fully solid. I sat back, rubbing a hand over my face. I wanted to believe it was an error, a glitch in the ancient cameras. But the static in my radio, the whisper, I had heard it. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch. And suddenly, I didn't feel so alone in that factory anymore. I went back the next night. I told myself I was an idiot for not quitting, but some part of me needed to see, to understand. If I could prove it was nothing, just a malfunctioning camera, just the wind slipping through, cracked windows, then maybe I could walk away without feeling like I was losing my mind. This time I went straight to the storage room. The door was open. I stopped cold. I knew for a fact that it had been locked the night before. I stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. The room was nearly empty. Just a few broken crates, an old spinning wheel pushed against the far wall. The air was thick with the scent of old fabric and mildew. I took a careful step forward. A loud thump behind me. I spun around, flashlight flickering. The door had slammed shut. I grabbed the handle, yanking hard. It wouldn't budge. Then, a whisper, right by my ear. Soft, gentle, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. I bolted. I don't remember how I got the door open. I don't remember running through the empty hallways, lungs burning. All I remember is bursting into the security office, slamming the door behind me, hands shaking as I locked it. The cameras flickered, and in the grainy footage of the second floor, the storage room door was still closed, like it had never been opened. Like I had never gone inside. I didn't quit. I should have. But the factory had me now. I knew its secrets were buried deep, locked behind doors that shouldn't open, whispered through walls that shouldn't speak. And if something was still in that building, if some shadow had lingered long after the last loom stopped, then I needed to know why. I didn't tell my supervisor about the storage room. What would I even say? That I'd seen a shadow walk through a locked door? That I'd heard a voice whispering in my ear when no one else was around? No. If I wanted answers, I had to find them myself. I spent the next afternoon digging through archived records about the Caldwell textile factory. Most of it was what I expected. Financial troubles, labor disputes, reports of declining production before the factory shut down. But then I found something else. A death report. Eleanor Caldwell, factory worker, deceased, November 19th, 1948. No cause of death listed. Just deceased. I frowned, flipping through the old files. But there was nothing else, no police report, no official statement. Just her name, buried beneath decades of forgotten paperwork. I thought about the whispers, the shadow, the door that shouldn't have opened. And for the first time since taking this job, I had a name. Eleanor. That night I entered the factory with one goal: to see her. If she was the one whispering through the walls, moving through locked doors, waiting in the empty hallways, then I needed to know why. I started my rounds like usual, but I barely paid attention to the sub-basement or the first floor. I was waiting for the second floor, the storage room. And as I reached it, I stopped. The door was already open. The air felt thicker inside. The scent of dust and old fabric clinging to the walls. I stepped in slowly, my flashlight cutting through the dark, and then something moved. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A figure standing near the spinning wheel. She was tall and thin, her frame wrapped in what looked like layers of old, tattered cloth. And her face. No, there was no face. Just thread, woven tightly where her features should have been, as if she had been stitched together from fabric and shadow. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I wanted to move, to run. But she turned toward me and I couldn't look away. Then she spoke, but her lips didn't move. The words unraveled from the air, soft and whisper thin. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch. The room lurched, my vision blurred, the air pressing down on me like the weight of too many hands. And then, I was falling. I hit the floor, hard, gasping as the pressure suddenly vanished. The storage room was empty again. No woman, no whispering voice. Just me, lying on my back, heart pounding in my ears. Had I imagined her? Then I saw the spinning wheel, It wasn't covered in dust anymore. The wood gleamed like someone had been using it. My stomach turned. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling out of the room. And as I reached the hallway, my radio crackled to life. I flinched, my hand instinctively going to my belt, but I hadn't touched it. The channel was open, filled with static, and then a voice. Not my supervisor, not a voice I recognized. A woman's voice, soft, threadbare. "Help me." The radio went dead. I didn't go back into the storage room. I barely finished my shift, locking myself in the security office until morning. But one thing was clear. Eleanor Caldwell was still here, and she was trying to tell me something. I didn't go back to the storage room the next night. I wanted to. I wanted to convince myself I had imagined it. The woman in thread, the spinning, wheel, the voice on the radio. But deep down I knew better. Eleanor Caldwell was still here, and she wanted something. Instead of starting my rounds in the sub-basement, I went straight to the security office and pulled up the footage from last night. I fast-forwarded to the moment I had entered the storage room. The screen showed me standing at the doorway, stepping inside, flashlight beam bouncing against the walls. Then static. The feed cut out for exactly 47 seconds. When the image returned, I was on the floor, gasping for air, scrambling out of the room like something had thrown me down. But the worst part? In the entire recording, I was alone. There was no woman, no shadowed figure wrapped in fabric, no flicker of movement except me. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. I hadn't imagined it. I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. But the cameras had seen nothing. Which meant whatever was haunting this place wasn't just lingering in the physical world. It was deeper than that. By 2:09 a.m., I finally forced myself to start my rounds. The sub-basement was quiet, though it felt colder than usual. I hurried, threw my check, and climbed to the first floor. Halfway through the hallway, my radio crackled. Not static, something else. I stopped walking, raising the device to my ear. For a long moment, the channel was dead. Then a sound. Faint, rhythmic. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of a loom. I turned toward the stairwell to the second floor. I already knew where the sound was coming from. The old production floor. The place where hundreds of looms had once been lined up in neat rows, weaving fabric, filling the air with the hum of machinery. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing too loudly in the empty building. As I reached the landing, the sound of the loom grew louder. Clack, clack, clack. I shined my flashlight across the factory floor. Nothing. The old machines were still, their belts sagging with age, dust thick on every surface. But the sound kept going. Clack, clack, clack. Then, a whisper. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch. I spun, my flashlight sweeping the room. The air shifted. Something moved in the darkness. A figure, not in front of me, behind me. I turned slowly, and there she was, Eleanor Caldwell, standing at the last loom, her hands moving over the machine, weaving invisible thread between her fingers. She was clearer now. The layers of fabric wrapped around her looked old and frayed, her form barely held together as if she was unraveling piece by piece. But her face was still missing. Only tight black thread held where her features should have been. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I should have run. I should have left. But then, she stopped weaving. Her head tilted slightly, like she was listening. And when she turned to face me, I heard it. The voice wasn't coming from her mouth, it came from all around me, stitched into the very air. I was not the first. I stiffened. She stepped forward, the fabric of her dress dragging against the floor, unraveling in thin strands. They took others before me. My pulse pounded in my ears. Took? I forced the word out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Eleanor nodded, her body flickering at the edges like a fraying thread. She raised a hand, pointing past me. I turned, my flashlight sweeping across the vast production floor. At first there was nothing, but then shadows. Not one. Not two. Dozens. Figures standing between the old machines, barely visible, their bodies thin and faded, like they had been worn down by time itself, and they were all watching me. I ran. I don't remember getting back to the security office. I don't remember locking the door, my hands shaking too hard to turn the key at first. I only remember sitting there breathing hard, staring at the monitors. The production floor camera was blacked out, only static, but the hallway camera, I leaned closer, my stomach twisting. The storage room door was open again, and standing just outside it was me, not sitting in the security office, not watching the monitors, but me standing in the hallway, flashlight in hand, staring into the dark. Then the screen flickered, and my face, my own face on the camera, slowly turned toward the lens. A whisper crawled through the radio beside me. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch. You are coming apart. I should have left. I should have thrown my radio onto the floor, walked out of the factory, and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the monitor, my breath frozen in my chest. There I was on the screen, standing outside the storage room, flashlight in hand, staring directly into the camera. Except I wasn't there. I was in the security office, watching. I moved my hand. The figure on the screen didn't. I reached for the radio. The other me tilted its head, not like a person, like a marionette, head tugged sideways by invisible strings. A sick, twisting fear crawled up my spine, because I finally understood. That wasn't me. The radio crackled. I jumped. But this time, it wasn't static. It was my supervisor. Elias? His voice sounded groggy. Why are you on Channel 1? My mouth was dry. What? Channel 1 was for emergencies only. I hadn't touched it, but then I heard it. Faint. The sound of a loom turning, not from inside the factory, from the radio. A steady, rhythmic clack, clack, clack filtering through the speaker, like someone was working on an old machine just behind my supervisor's voice. I gripped the radio tighter. You hear that? A pause. Then his voice came through again, low and cautious. Hear what? I closed my eyes. It wasn't coming through his end, it was only coming through mine. And then the monitor glitched. The figure, my double, moved. Its arm lifted, its flashlight flickering, as if inviting me forward. And then finally it spoke. Come inside. I bolted. I don't remember running through the hallways. I don't remember shoving open the factory doors or gasping for air as I stumbled into the parking lot. All I remember is the feeling of unraveling, like something had been tugging at the edges of me, picking me apart stitch by stitch. I made it to my car, shaking, breathless. I fumbled for my keys, barely managing to jam them into the ignition. Then, a movement in the rearview mirror. I snapped my eyes up. The factory loomed behind me. The windows were dark, except for one, the second-floor storage room, and standing in it, a figure. Not Eleanor, not the shadows on the factory floor. Me, watching, waiting. Mouth curled into something, not quite a smile. The headlights flickered. I slammed my foot onto the gas, and I didn't stop driving until the factory was nothing but a distant shadow in the rear view. I quit the next morning. I didn't bother giving a 2-week notice. I sent an email, ignored the 5 missed calls from my supervisor, and spent the rest of the day locked in my apartment. Curtains drawn, lights on. Poe sat beside me the whole time, letting out low, uneasy croaks as if he could still feel something lingering. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the next, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The storage room, the loom, spinning, and the other me waiting in the dark. A week later, I got a text from Zara. She was the new guard they had hired to replace me. I almost didn't answer, but the message sent a chill straight through me. Hey, Elias, weird question. Have you ever seen something on the second floor, like a figure? Tall, blurry, kind of hard to make out? I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. She sent another text. I saw it last night. Thought it was you at first, but the cameras showed me standing alone. So who the hell was I looking at? My hands went numb. I never responded. I just turned off my phone and sat there staring at the walls of my apartment, trying not to think about the factory, or the shadows still walking inside it. Because I knew what Zara had seen. The same thing I had seen on that grainy security feed. Not a ghost, not Eleanor Caldwell. Something worse, something wearing my face. And deep inside the Caldwell textile factory, the loom was still turning. It started as a dream. Reese and I had been searching for months, combing through listings, attending open houses that all felt the same. Cookie-cutter suburban homes with generic charm but no real soul. We wanted something different, something with history. Then we found the manor. The house stood at the end of a quiet road, nestled among towering oaks, their branches weaving a natural canopy over the long gravel driveway. Even from a distance, it had presence. Victorian architecture with intricate gables and a wraparound porch that overlooked the land. The kind of house that had seen generations come and go. The moment we stepped inside, I felt it. Not fear, exactly. Just wait, like the air carried something unspoken. The renovations are recent, the realtor Diane assured us, leading us through the rooms. The previous owners kept the original hardwood, refinished the moldings, but updated the wiring and plumbing. She hesitated slightly before continuing. The house was originally built in 1898 by the Ashworth family. They were well known in the area, owned the old mill down by the creek. I followed her gaze to the window where the trees thinned, revealing a sliver of dark water in the distance. What happened to them, I asked. Diane shifted. Well, they lived here until 1947. That was the year their son went missing, Peter Ashworth. He was 7. My stomach tightened. Missing? They say he drowned during a flood, she said. The creek used to swell dangerously after heavy rains. His body was never found. A cold prickle ran down my arms. Reese squeezed my hand, ever the practical one. That was decades ago, he said lightly. Tragic, but not exactly relevant now. I forced a smile, nodding along. By the end of the day, we'd put in an offer. 2 weeks later, the house was ours. The first few weeks were perfect. We spent our evenings unpacking, sipping wine on the porch, listening to the distant hum of crickets. Reese worked long hours, often coming, home after dark, but I didn't mind. The house felt safe, solid. Until the night I heard the water, it was late. Reese was still at the office, and I was curled up in bed, half asleep with a book resting against my chest. The wind rattled the windows, a soft, rhythmic sound, almost soothing. Then, beneath it, something else. A rush of water. At first, I thought it was the creek. Maybe the wind had stirred the current, but no, this was closer, inside. I sat up, listening. The sound grew clearer, more distinct. The gurgling rush of a tub filling, water sloshing against porcelain. The master bathroom. My breath hitched. Sliding out of bed, I padded across the room. My heartbeat a steady drum in my ears. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, the noise swelled. Chaotic splashing like someone thrashing in the water. A drowning sound. I flicked on the light. The clawfoot tub sat in the center of the room, pristine and empty. No water. Not a single drop. The sound stopped instantly. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the edge of the sink, trying to steady my breathing. It had to be the pipes. The house was old. Maybe the plumbing was acting up. That was logical. But As I turned to leave, something in the mirror caught my eye, a faint, damp outline on the edge of the tub, like the imprint of a small hand. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it. It was easy enough to explain away. Old houses made noises, wood settling, pipes shifting, wind sneaking, through unseen cracks. Maybe the tub had been damp from a previous shower and I just hadn't noticed. Logical explanations, rational thinking. I didn't mention it to Reese. He was already juggling enough. Tight deadlines at work, late nights at the office. The last thing he needed was me acting paranoid over a bit of old plumbing. But as the days passed, the sound came back. It was never predictable. Some nights I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling waiting for it. Other times I'd almost convinced myself it was over, until it started again. A quiet trickle at first, like a slow leak, then a sudden rush of water, crashing against porcelain, and then the splashing. Frantic, erratic, like someone struggling just beneath the surface. Each time I found the tub empty, dry. Each time my skin prickled with the certainty that I was hearing something I shouldn't be. A week later, I woke up to the sound of Reese in the bathroom. It was early, just past dawn, and golden light was filtering through the curtains. The shower was running, steam curling beneath the bathroom door. I rolled over with a groggy smile. "You're up early?" No response. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Reese?" The water shut. Off abruptly. Silence. Something about it felt wrong. Sliding out of bed, I padded toward the bathroom and knocked lightly. "Hey, you okay?" Nothing. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty. The tub was dry. The air smelled faintly of damp earth. A strange, musty scent that didn't belong. A chill ran down my spine. Reese was still asleep downstairs on the couch, where he'd dozed off watching TV the night before. I hadn't imagined it. I gripped the edge of the sink, my breath coming too fast. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe stress was messing with my head, or maybe I wasn't alone in the house. That evening, I called Juniper. We had been best friends since college, roommates in our tiny off-campus apartment, sneaking cheap wine into movie theaters, whispering about our worst fears at 2 a.m. She was the kind of person who never judged, who listened without skepticism. "I need you to come over," I said, pressing the phone to my ear as I paced the kitchen. "Something weird is happening." "How weird?" "I don't know, just come stay the night." She arrived an hour later, her car kicking up gravel as she pulled into the driveway. Juniper stepped out, stretching her arms over her head. "Damn, this place is huge." She grinned. "Are we ghost hunting?" I forced a laugh, but my fingers tightened around my sweater sleeves. Just, tell me if you notice anything." We spent the evening like we always did, curled up on the couch, watching trashy reality TV, eating leftover pizza. For a while, it felt normal, safe. Then, at 1:37 a.m., it happened again. We were upstairs, talking in low voices, when the sound started. A faint trickle, a steady rush. Juniper stiffened. "Do you hear that?" My stomach twisted. "Yeah." The splashing grew louder. Juniper shot me a look, her face pale in the dim light. "Is that the tub?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah." She pushed back the blankets and stood. "Okay, we're checking it out." I didn't want to move. My body felt like it was made of stone, but I forced myself to follow. The bathroom door was already open. The sound was deafening now, water crashing against porcelain, desperate, uneven splashes. Juniper hesitated. Then before I could stop her, she reached in and flicked on the light. The noise stopped instantly. The tub was dry. Juniper stared. "What the hell?" I let out a shaky breath. "You heard it, right?" She nodded slowly, stepping inside. Her fingers hovered over the faucet handles. The pipes aren't even cold. If water had been running, the metal would be cool to the touch. A thick silence settled between us. Then she frowned, leaning closer to the porcelain. "Alara, look at this." I followed her gaze. A single wet handprint. Small, too small, right on the edge of the tub. I felt something cold press against my ribs. A certainty I hadn't wanted to name. Something had been in the water. Juniper didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, staring at the handprint. A single bead of water slid from its edge, vanishing into the dry porcelain. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. "Ilara," she finally said, her voice lower than before. "What exactly do you know about this house?" I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my hands. "Not much, just what the realtor told us, that a little boy, Peter Ashworth, went missing in 1947. They think he drowned in the creek." Juniper's brow furrowed. "So why the tub?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But I had a terrible feeling that whatever had happened to Peter hadn't started in the creek." The next morning, Juniper refused to let it go. "You need to look into this," she said, swirling a spoon absently in her coffee. "I mean, if you were hearing weird noises and then I came over and heard nothing, I'd say fine. Maybe you're stressed. Maybe your mind is playing tricks on you. But I heard it too, and that handprint—" She trailed off, shaking her head. I didn't need convincing. An hour later, I found myself at the local library, sifting through old newspaper archives. The smell of dust and aging paper filled the air, and the hum of the microfilm machine felt almost hypnotic. The articles were easy to find. Peter's disappearance had been big news in 1947. The town had launched a massive search effort. Volunteers combed the woods, dragging the creek for days, but no trace of him was ever found. The assumption was that he had been swept away in the floodwaters. I was about to move on when something caught my eye. An article dated June 14, 1947. It was small, buried in the back pages. The kind of story most people would have skimmed past. Mysterious disturbances reported at Ashworth Manor. I leaned in closer. The article described strange occurrences at the house in the weeks leading up to Peter's disappearance. His mother, Eleanor Ashworth, had told neighbors about hearing water running at odd hours, always in the master bathroom, faucets turning on by themselves, sounds of splashing when no one was inside. I gripped the paper tightly. This wasn't new. It had been happening before Peter vanished. That night I told Reese everything. I expected him to brush it off, to tell me I was overthinking, that I was letting old stories get into my head. Instead, he was quiet, too quiet. After a long pause, he ran a hand over his face. "I should have told you." My stomach dropped. "Told me what?" He hesitated. "I've heard it too." I stared at him. "You... what?" "The water," he admitted. "I heard it once last week, but I thought I was dreaming. And then yesterday, when I got home from work, the tub was wet. I figured maybe you had just taken a bath, but I guess you didn't." I swallowed hard. "No, I didn't." For the first time, I could see it on his face, the same unease that had been settling into my bones for weeks. Something was wrong with this house. Something was trying to be heard. I barely slept that night. Reese had admitted he'd heard it too, the water, the splashing, but instead of making me feel less alone, it made everything worse. It meant this was real. It wasn't stress, it wasn't my imagination, and it wasn't something I could ignore anymore. By the time the sun crept through the curtains, I had made up my mind. I needed to know the truth. Juniper met me outside, the town records office, just before noon. She was holding 2 coffees, her expression serious. "You're sure about this?" I nodded, taking the cup she offered. If Peter's disappearance started before the flood, then maybe something happened inside the house. Maybe someone covered it up. She exhaled. "Let's find out." The records office was small and quiet, the kind of place no one really visited unless they had to. An older woman at the front desk glanced up as we entered, adjusting her reading glasses. "Can I help you?" I hesitated. "I'm looking for any records on the Ashworth family, specifically from 1947. She studied me for a moment, then motioned toward the back. Property deeds and public records are in the archive room. Death records are restricted, but if you're looking for obituaries, we have those on file. Juniper and I exchanged a glance before following her instructions. The room was small, lined with metal filing cabinets and shelves stacked with aging documents. We split up, combing through folders, our fingers skimming over brittle pages. Then, after nearly an hour of searching, I found something. Police report, June 3rd, 1947. I froze. Juniper. She looked up from across the room. I swallowed hard, reading aloud. Eleanor Ashworth, mother of Peter Ashworth, reported a break-in on the night of June 3, 1947. No signs of forced entry. No valuables taken. The only disturbance was found in the master bathroom. Water left running in the tub. Juniper stared at me. Ilara. I kept reading, my pulse thudding in my ears. Mrs. Ashworth insisted she heard something in the house, a noise described as thrashing water. She stated that when she entered the bathroom, she saw the rest of the page had been torn away. By the time we left the records office, my thoughts were a tangled mess. The break-in had happened just days before Peter vanished. And someone, maybe Eleanor, maybe someone else, had seen something in that bathroom, something that was bad enough to be erased from the report. Juniper pulled her jacket tighter around herself as we stepped outside. We need to check the house. I nodded. The sun had started to dip behind the trees by the time we pulled into the driveway. The house loomed against the twilight sky, its windows dark, reflecting nothing back at us. Reese wasn't home yet. I hesitated for half a second before unlocking the front door. Juniper followed me inside, and as soon as I stepped into the hallway, a strange feeling settled over me. The air felt heavier, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Then, from upstairs, a sound, a slow, steady trickle. Juniper's fingers tightened around my arm. The tub. I forced myself to move. Step by step, we climbed the staircase, the wooden boards creaking beneath our weight. My pulse pounded in my ears. The bathroom door was slightly open. A faint yellow glow spilled from inside. I reached out with a shaking hand and pushed it open. The water was running. Both faucets were fully turned on, streams of ice-cold water pouring into the clawfoot tub. The surface was eerily still, too still. Then, a ripple, small at first, then another. Then, something moved beneath the water. I stumbled back, slamming into Juniper. For a split second I saw it. A shape, small, a boy. His limbs moved sluggishly, as if weighed down by something unseen. His head tilted upward, his face barely breaking the surface. And then, in an instant, the tub was empty. The water was gone. The porcelain was dry. The only trace left behind was a single, small handprint on the edge. Juniper's breath came, in short, shallow bursts. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. Somewhere in the house, the wind shifted, making the old pipes groan. But I knew now. It wasn't the wind. It had never been the wind. We left the bathroom in silence. Juniper and I didn't speak as we walked downstairs, didn't speak as we sat at the kitchen table, our hands wrapped tightly around our untouched mugs of coffee. The house was quiet now, still, but it didn't feel empty. It had never been empty. Juniper finally broke the silence. Ilara, you saw it too, right? I nodded slowly, my fingers tightening around the ceramic mug. It was a boy. Peter. I didn't say his name aloud, but it settled in the air between us, unspoken and undeniable. Juniper exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. I've heard ghost stories before. Spirits stuck in houses, repeating the same moment over and over. But this, she trailed off, shaking her head. It was real. I swallowed. I need to tell Reese. He came home late that night, exhausted from another long shift. I could tell by the way he dropped his bag by the door, by the slow way he ran a hand down his face before making his way to the kitchen. But when he saw my face, he stopped. Ilara, what's wrong? I hesitated for only a moment before telling him everything. I told him about the noises, about the handprints, about the police report Juniper and I had found. I told him about the water, how it moved, How it wasn't just a sound, but something real, something alive. When I finally finished, he didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, his jaw tight, his hands braced against the back of the chair. Then finally, he spoke. "You think Peter's still here?" I nodded. "I don't think he ever left." That night I dreamed of water. I was standing in the bathroom, my feet bare against the cold tile. The tub was full, the water a dark murky green, rippling softly as if something had just moved beneath the surface. I knew I had to look. I didn't want to, but I had to. Slowly, I stepped closer, peering into the water. And then, a hand shot up from the depths, small fingers clawing at the air, reaching for me. The water sloshed violently, and I could see him now. A little boy, his pale face twisted in terror, his mouth opening in a silent scream. He was drowning. I woke up gasping, my skin damp with sweat. I could still hear the water in my ears. But as I sat up, my breath coming fast, I realized something. Peter had been drowning, not in the creek, not outside, in the tub. The next morning I called Juniper. "I need to go back to the records office." She didn't ask why. She just said, "I'll drive." This time I didn't search for property records, I searched for death records. And I found it. Peter Ashworth, date of death June 6, 1947. My stomach turned. I read the cause of death 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Drowning, but not in the creek. Inside the house. Peter had drowned in the bathtub. I gripped the paper, my hands shaking. The police report was wrong. The town had been wrong. He hadn't gone missing. He had died here. And someone had covered it up. That night I stood in the bathroom. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't see. "I know the truth now," I whispered. For a moment there was nothing. Then, slowly, the faucet turned on. The water trickled out in a slow, steady stream, swirling down the drain. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." The water stopped. The silence that followed felt different, lighter, as if something had finally been released. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like a home again. And that night when I went to sleep, I didn't hear the water. Not ever again. My grandfather never spoke about Elmwood Sanatorium in a way that suggested fear. It was always just there, a quiet, decaying reminder of what it once was, a facility for the ill and forgotten, tucked away in upstate New York. When I was a kid, he would tell stories about the old building, but never in a way that made it sound haunted. He'd chuckle as he recounted the soft, echoing footsteps he sometimes heard when no one else was home, or the rustling of paper, like a nurse flipping through medical charts. "It's just the past replaying itself," he'd say. "Buildings have memories just like we do." As a child, I believed him. It made sense. Places like Elmwood, with their long histories and heavy walls, probably did hold echoes of the people who had passed through. But as I got older, the house didn't feel like it was just holding memories. It felt like something was still living, in them. It started small, a change in the air. There were places in the house that always seemed colder than others. The upstairs hallway, for example, even in the peak of summer, would carry a damp chill that settled into my skin. Sometimes I'd wake up feeling like someone had been standing beside my bed watching. It wasn't just unease, it was something heavier, something pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. Then, there were the sounds, not the harmless echoes my grandfather had mentioned. These were different, sharp metallic scraping noises in the dead of night, whispers that had no source, just faint enough to make me doubt whether I had heard them at all. And the dreams. The dreams were the worst part. They started when I was 15. Shapeless figures moving through darkened corridors, the walls of the sanatorium stretching on endlessly. The air smelled like antiseptic, and in every dream I would hear it. A name. Faint. Scratchy. Elias. I never told my grandfather about the dreams. He was old, and his health was starting to decline. The last thing he needed was to worry about my overactive imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in Elmwood Sanatorium hadn't stayed behind when my family left. It had followed us, and it was only getting stronger. By the time I turned 16, Elmwood Sanatorium wasn't just a place in my grandfather's stories. It was something that had embedded itself into our lives. The house we lived in wasn't the sanatorium itself, but it was close. Too close. It had once been part of the facility's staff quarters, converted into a residence decades before my family moved in. Grandfather used to say that the walls had been repainted, the floors redone, but the bones of the place, those remained the same. And lately, it felt like those bones were shifting. It started when my mother fell ill. She had always been strong, never one to complain about aches or pains, but in the span of a few weeks, she became a shadow of herself. She was constantly exhausted, her skin pale, her movements slow. The doctors ran tests, but nothing came back conclusive. It's stress, they said, fatigue. But I knew better, because the night she collapsed in the upstairs hallway, the coldest part of the house, I saw something. It was just for a second, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. A tall, gaunt figure standing at the end of the hall, partially obscured by the dim light. The moment my eyes focused, it was gone. But the feeling it left behind, that stayed. A deep, suffocating dread. The house changed after that. The nights became unbearable. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my ears straining for sounds I knew were there. Footsteps on the stairs when no one was awake. The distant sound of a metal cart being rolled across tile floors. Whispers, not words, just a faint, scratchy murmur, like someone speaking through a broken radio. And the name, Elias. Always Elias. At first I thought I was losing my mind, but then my cat, Salem, started acting differently. He had always been fearless, the kind of cat that would chase after shadows and bat at the air like he was playing with invisible threads. But now he refused to enter certain rooms. He would sit at the entrance to the upstairs hallway, staring at something I couldn't see, his ears flattened against his head. Some nights, he would hiss at nothing. Other nights, I would wake up to find him pressed against my side, his body trembling. Something in the house had changed, and whatever it was getting stronger. I was never one to believe in seances or ghost hunting nonsense, but by the time I turned 17, I was desperate. The presence in the house was getting worse. My mother's health continued to decline, her doctors still unsure why. My grandfather grew quieter, his usual warmth fading into something distant and preoccupied. Even Salem, my fearless cat, had become a nervous wreck. And the dreams, they had turned into something else. I wasn't just watching corridors anymore. I was in them. Walking barefoot through a hospital ward bathed in flickering light, the walls stained with something dark and old. The metallic scent of blood and antiseptic filled my lungs, and always on that name, Elias. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, and the feeling wouldn't leave me when I opened my eyes. It would cling to me like whatever had been in the dream had followed me back. That's why, when Juniper suggested the spirit board, I didn't immediately shut her down. It was a stupid idea. I knew that. But sitting in my room with Juniper and our friend Caleb cross-legged beside me, I felt something shift, like the air had thickened, waiting. "You sure about this?" Caleb asked. "No." But I nodded anyway. Juniper set the board down between us, smoothing her hands over the wooden surface. "If something's here, we'll ask it to talk to us. And if nothing happens, then great. We know it's just in our heads. Except I already knew it wasn't in my head." We placed our fingers on the planchette. The candle flickered, but the air remained still. Juniper cleared her throat. "Is there a spirit here with us?" "Nothing." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe. The planchette twitched. I sucked in a breath. Did one of you move it? They both shook their heads. The planchette jerked again. Then slowly it began to slide. Y-E-S. A sharp chill ran up my spine. Juniper swallowed. What's your name? The response came faster this time. E-L-I-A-S. I felt my stomach drop. The candle sputtered violently, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. Juniper pulled her hands back. Okay, I think we're done. The planchette moves on its own. D-O-N-T-L-E-A-V-E. Then, a loud crash from downstairs. We jumped to our feet. Caleb swore. My heart slammed against my ribs. It took me a second to convince my legs to move, to force myself out of the room and down the stairs. The kitchen was a mess. The cabinet doors were wide open. Medical instruments, scissors, scalpels, old rusted forceps were scattered across the floor. Things we did not own. My hands shook. Juniper whispered, "Ilara, what the hell is going on in this house?" I had no answer, but I knew one thing. Elias wasn't just a name anymore. We didn't sleep that night. Juniper, Caleb, and I sat in the living room, too afraid to go back upstairs. The kitchen still felt wrong, like something had shifted, something was watching. We could see the cabinet doors hanging open, the rusted medical instruments scattered across the floor. None of us wanted to touch them. Salem paced near the staircase, his tail fluffed, his ears pinned flat against his skull. Every so often he'd stop, stare up at the darkened second floor, and let out a low, guttural growl. It wasn't until almost 4 a.m. that Juniper finally spoke. "Ilara," she whispered, her voice tight. "We need to leave." I should have listened. I should have packed a bag, walked out that door, and never looked back. But it was my house, my home. And more than that, I needed to understand why this was happening. Because Elias wasn't just a shadow lurking in the corners anymore. He was trying to reach me. By the next afternoon, Juniper and Caleb were gone, promising to come back later. I didn't tell my mom what had happened. She was too weak, too exhausted to handle it. Grandfather barely spoke anymore, his eyes always focused on something distant, something unseen. I spent the rest of the day researching, digging through every record I could find on Elias and Elmwood Sanatorium. And finally, I found something. It was a small mention, buried in an old hospital log from 1932. A Dr. Elias Whitmore had been the chief physician at Elmwood, except he wasn't just a doctor, he was also a patient. The records were vague, more speculation than fact, but they suggested that Elias Whitmore had once practiced medicine on himself, convinced he could cure his own deteriorating mind. He had been obsessed with unlocking what he called the science of the soul, experimenting on others when his own body began to fail. And then, one night in December 1932, he disappeared. No formal death record, no burial, just a single note in the file scribbled hastily in red ink. Whitmore vanished. His work is unfinished. I felt a cold pressure settle over my chest. He never left Elmwood, and now neither had I. That night, the house turned against me. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body tense and alert. Every creak of the house made my stomach tighten. Every distant rustle sent my heart hammering. Then, just past midnight, a whisper. Not in my dream. Right next to my ear. "Ilara." I shot upright, my breath catching in my throat. The room was freezing, so cold I could see my breath in the air. I reached for my lamp. Before I could turn it on, something moved in the far corner of my room. A shadow. Tall. Gaunt. Unmoving. My fingers shook as I flicked on the light. The corner was empty, but the whisper remained. Scratchy. Faint. Close. "Help me." I choked back a cry, scrambling out of bed. Salem was already at the door, his fur puffed, his body tense. I grabbed him and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the front door. And as I yanked it open, I heard the sound behind me. A slow metallic scraping, like a scalpel being dragged across a tile. Elias wasn't just in the house anymore. He was with me. I didn't go back inside. Not right away. Instead, I stood in the cold night air, my breath sharp in my lungs, Salem trembling in my arms. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent. But I knew. It wasn't empty. Elias was inside, waiting, watching. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew if I stayed in that house any longer, I would find out, and I wasn't sure I'd survive it. By morning, I had made my decision. I had to end this. I spent the next few hours preparing. First, I called Juniper and Caleb. "Meet me at the house," I told them. "I need your help." Then I did, something I had been avoiding for weeks. I went to my grandfather. I found him sitting in the sunroom, staring out at nothing, the lines of his face heavier than I'd ever seen them. For a moment I hesitated. Then I knelt beside him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa, who is Elias?" His reaction was immediate. His whole body went stiff, his eyes widening with something like fear, a look I had never seen on him before. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he exhaled shakily, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Then, finally, "Ilara, I should have told you." I swallowed. "Told me what?" He turned to me, his voice hollow. "Elias never left. Elmwood." A heavy silence settled between us. Then, slowly, he began to explain. Elias Whitmore had been more than just a doctor. He had been obsessed with death, terrified of it. He believed he could cheat it, that he could hold on to life if he simply understood it enough. And when his own body started failing him, he experimented. On himself, on patients, on anyone. But something had gone wrong. The staff at Elmwood had tried to contain him, but by the time they realized the extent of what he had done, it was too late. His body had deteriorated beyond repair, and yet, he didn't die. Not in the way a man should. Instead, something in him lingered, trapped between life and death. A shadow, stretched thin, unable to move on. And Elmwood held him there, until my family moved in, until my mother fell ill, until I started hearing his name, until I woke him up. By the time Juniper and Caleb arrived, my hands were shaking. I told them everything, the experiments, the disappearances, the way Elias had stayed behind, unfinished, and the fact that he was no longer tied to Elmwood. He was tied to me. The plan was simple. We had to cut him off, destroy his connection to the house. We gathered everything he had, left behind, the rusted medical tools, the scattered patient records, the spirit board that had called him by name. We built a fire in the backyard, the flames licking hungrily at the sky. One by one, we threw his remnants into the flames. The house shook. I felt it in my bones. A deep, guttural scream echoed through the night, high-pitched and wrong, like a sound being ripped apart. And then, the shadows in the windows moved. Something inside the house shifted. The weight pressing against my chest lifted. And then silence. Real silence. For the first time in years, the house was empty. I left the next morning, packed a bag, took Salem, moved out. Juniper and Caleb helped my mom relocate to a smaller apartment in town. My grandfather stayed behind, but when I asked him if he was sure, he only smiled faintly. "He was never after me," he said. "It was you." He was right. Because after I left, the nightmares stopped. The whispers stopped. The name Elias disappeared from my thoughts like a dream I had forgotten upon waking. For a long time I told myself it was over, that I had escaped. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear it. A faint, scratchy whisper, like something trying to reach me through the dark, and I know Elias never left. He's just waiting. I never thought much about my aunt's observatory when I was younger. To me, it was just another room in her house, a small dome tucked away at the back of the second floor. She used to let me sit with her while she worked, adjusting the old telescope and scribbling notes in thick leather-bound journals. The air in that room was always different, charged, like the aftermath of a summer storm. There was a scent, too, something sharp and metallic beneath the dusty aroma of old books and parchment. "It's the ozone," my aunt would say absent-mindedly, flipping through a star chart. "Electricity in the air. It happens sometimes after a storm, or when the telescope is charged from the equipment." But the scent was there, even on clear nights, even when the telescope sat untouched. I would sit in the deep leather chair across from her and listen to the soft scratch of her pen against paper, the rhythmic turning of pages, the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Sometimes, when she wasn't looking, I'd glance toward the farthest corner of the room, where the shadows always seemed too deep. I never saw anything, but I always felt like something was watching. When I moved into my new apartment years, later the scent followed me. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe I had spent too much time in that observatory, breathing in its old paper musk and stormy air. I had packed my things in a rush, hauling them into the tiny one-bedroom unit I had found in the city. The apartment wasn't anything special, a pre-war building with high ceilings, old radiators, and a persistent draft. It smelled like fresh paint and stale air when I moved in. Then, after the first week, the scent returned. It was faint at first, barely noticeable. I caught it in passing, when I first stepped into the apartment after work or when I rolled over in bed at night. It was that same sharp metallic tang, like ozone and aged paper. I checked everything, the vents, the floors, even the old pipes. Beneath the sink, nothing. Still, the smell remained. The first time I saw something, it was late. I had been unpacking all evening, stacking books onto shelves and setting up my desk in the corner of the living room. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by half-empty boxes when I felt it. A shift in the air. The room had been still a second ago. Now there was a presence, something tall standing just at the edge of my vision. I turned my head, expecting to see a shadow cast by the street lamp outside. Instead, I saw him. A figure motionless near the far wall. Indistinct but impossibly tall, its shape barely outlined against the dim light. And at its peak, a wide-brimmed hat. My breath caught. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. The air hummed, filled with that electric charge, that sharp scent. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I was alone again. The room felt normal. The air settled. But the scent, that stayed. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I even say? That my apartment smelled weird? That I thought I had seen something in the dark? I had spent too many nights alone, too many hours lost in my thoughts. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind filling in gaps. But as the weeks passed, I began to feel it more often. That presence, standing at the edge of the room, just beyond my sight. It never moved, never approached, but it was always there, watching. I stopped unpacking after that night. Most of my books remained in their boxes. My framed photos leaned against the walls instead of hanging. I told myself I was just tired, that moving was stressful, and that I needed a break. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to disturb anything. The scent of ozone and parchment didn't go away. If anything, it became stronger. Some nights, it was barely noticeable, a faint metallic tang in the air. Other nights, it was overwhelming, thick and charged, making the hairs on my arms rise as if the atmosphere itself was bracing for something. The worst part was that I wasn't imagining it. One evening, I invited my partner Theo over for dinner. I hadn't told him about any of this, about the strange scent, the figure in the dark, the feeling of something watching. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to pretend the apartment was just that, an apartment. Theo arrived just after 7, carrying takeout and a bottle of wine. "Finally," he said, stepping inside. I was beginning to think you'd become a hermit. I smiled, trying to ignore the weight pressing against my chest. Yeah, well, moving takes a lot out of you. He kissed my cheek, then paused. Do you smell that? My stomach dropped. Smell what? Theo frowned, sniffing the air. It's weird, kind of metallic, I don't know, like the air before a thunderstorm? I forced a laugh. Maybe there's rain coming. Theo nodded, unconvinced, but let it go. I kept my smile, but inside, my mind was racing. If he smelled it too, that meant it wasn't just in my head. The night passed quietly at first. We ate, watched a dumb reality show, and drank wine. For a little while, everything felt normal. Then, close to midnight, Theo went to the bathroom. I was on the couch, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when it happened. A shift in the air. The apartment was still a second ago. Now it wasn't. Something was behind me. I felt it before I saw it. That static hum, the charged weight pressing against my back. My breathing stalled, my fingers tightening around my phone. Slowly, I turned my head. And there, standing in the farthest corner of the living room, was the figure. Tall, indistinct, watching. The brim of its hat cast a long, unnatural shadow, stretching across the floor toward me. I wanted to move, to speak, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. The air was thick, crushing, pressing down on my ribs like I had fallen too deep underwater. Then, the bathroom door opened. The moment Theo stepped out, the pressure lifted. The figure was gone. The air returned to normal. The scent of ozone faded. I let out a sharp breath, my heart hammering in my chest. Theo didn't notice at first. He was talking about something, his voice casual, normal. But then he stopped, his expression shifting. Are you okay? I swallowed. Yeah. But I wasn't. Because now I knew it wasn't just me. Something was in this apartment. And it wasn't leaving. I barely slept after that night. Even with Theo next to me, his steady breathing filling the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just beyond my vision, watching. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadowed figure in the living room, its wide-brimmed hat casting unnatural darkness across the floor. For days, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, that I had been tired, that my brain had filled in details that weren't really there. But Theo had smelled the ozone, too. He had felt the cold, the wrongness of the space, and I knew that if I let my guard down, if I truly let myself believe, I would have to confront the one thing I had been trying to avoid. This thing was real. I started working late to avoid the apartment. My job as an editor gave me the excuse I needed. I'd stay at the office long after my coworkers had left, hunching over manuscripts until my eyes burned from the computer screen. But eventually, I had to go home. And when I did, the presence was waiting. I tried to ignore it. I set up my desk in the study, a small room at the back of the apartment, and convinced myself that if I stayed busy, I wouldn't notice the charged air, the lingering scent of ozone. It worked for a while, until one night it didn't. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I felt it. I had been buried in work for hours, reading through an article submission, when the first wave of unease hit me. It started subtly, a shift in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The hum of my desk lamp buzzed too loud in the silence. Then, the temperature dropped. Not the usual draft from the old apartment vents. This was sharp, unnatural, immediate, like a cold wind sweeping through the study, except nothing moved. I sat up, my breath hitching. The scent of ozone was thick now, burning at the back of my throat. And then I felt it. Eyes on me. I turned slowly, my pulse hammering. The door to the study was slightly ajar, leading into the darkened hallway. Beyond it, I could just make out the outline of the living room, where the dim glow of the street lamp barely reached. And in that shadowed space, something stood. The figure. Tall. Watching. The wide brim of its hat dipped forward slightly, obscuring its face. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt them, locked onto me, unwavering. My breath came in short gasps, my fingers clutching the edge of my desk. I wanted to move, to run, to turn on every damn light in the apartment. But I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in that moment, the air between us stretched too thin, too charged. Then the figure tilted its head. Not much, just a fraction of an inch. A silent acknowledgement. And in that second, a horrible thought hit me. It knows I see it. The weight in the room shifted. The scent of ozone became overpowering. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The air returned to normal. The temperature rose. The silence of the apartment settled back into something mundane. I let out a shuddering breath, my hands trembling. I didn't sleep that night. Because for the first time since I had moved in, I wasn't just sensing something in the apartment. It was sensing me back. I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination. That was easier than believing the truth. Maybe I had been overworked, exhausted from the move. Maybe the cold air, the shifting shadows, and the scent of ozone were just my mind making something out of nothing. But deep down, I knew better. I hadn't just seen something in the apartment. It had seen me too. A few days later, I started researching. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. Ghost stories? Sleep paralysis? My mind grasped at anything that could explain what I had been experiencing. But nothing I found quite fit. Then I stumbled onto something, a discussion forum buried deep in a thread about shadow figures. "They're not ghosts," one user had written. Not exactly. Some call them observers. They don't haunt places the way spirits do. They haunt people. A shiver ran down my spine. I kept reading. Observers aren't the remnants of someone who once lived. They aren't echoes of the past. They are something else. Something that's always been watching. That's when I saw it. A grainy black and white sketch attached to one of the posts. A tall, indistinct figure, a wide-brimmed hat. I felt my breath catch. My fingers went numb against the keyboard. I had seen this before, in my living room, in my study, standing in my hallway. It wasn't just me. Other people had seen it too, which meant it was real. That night, Theo came over again. I wasn't planning on telling him. Not yet. But the moment he stepped inside, he frowned, rubbing his arms. Jesus, it's freezing in here. I hadn't noticed it at first, but he was right. The temperature had dropped again. Then, before I could respond, he stiffened. His head tilted slightly, his brow furrowed. "Do you hear that?" A slow, creeping dread coiled in my stomach. "Hear what?" He didn't answer right away. He just turned his head slightly as if trying to pinpoint the sound. Then finally, "It's like a low hum, almost electrical." I felt my stomach drop. He was hearing it too. I swallowed hard. "Theo, there's something I need to tell you." I told him everything. The scent of ozone, the cold spots, the figure standing in the living room. The moment it had tilted its head as if acknowledging that it knew I had seen it. Theo didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss it as stress or exhaustion. He just listened. And when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he exhaled. "Alara, your aunt's observatory, the one you grew up in." I frowned. "What about it?" He hesitated. "Did she ever say anything about the main room?" A chill ran up my spine, because now that I thought about it, she had avoided it. Even when she let me sit in the observatory with her, she never worked in the main room. She never talked about it. I had spent my whole life assuming it was just because she preferred her own space. But what if it was something else? What if she knew? What if the figure in my apartment had always been there, even before I moved in, even before I was born, watching, waiting? The air around us grew thicker. Theo shivered. "Elara," he whispered. I followed his gaze. My breath caught. There, in the dim reflection of the window, a figure stood behind us. Tall, unmoving. The brim of its hat casting a shadow over its featureless face. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was getting closer. I couldn't move. Theo couldn't either. We just stood there staring at the reflection in the window. The apartment was silent. No hum, no footsteps, no shift of fabric. But we could see it. The figure stood just a few feet behind us. Tall, still, watching. The brim of its hat curved unnaturally, the shadow beneath it impossibly dark. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I knew that if I turned around it would be closer. Theo's breathing was ragged, his hands clenched into fists. "Ilara," he whispered, voice barely audible. "We need to leave." I knew he was right, but somehow I also knew that running wouldn't matter. Because whatever this thing was, it wasn't tied to the apartment. It was tied to me. We backed away slowly, inching toward the door. I forced myself not to blink, not to look away from the reflection. My skin burned with the sensation of being watched, as if its gaze had weight. Then, just as we reached the door, the lights went out. A blast of freezing air rushed through the apartment. My breath turned into mist in front of me. And then, the whispering began, scratchy, garbled, like something trying to speak through a broken radio. I gasped, my fingers fumbling against the doorknob. "Theo." The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed against my ears, thick and unnatural, stretching out too long. Then, directly behind me, in a voice that was neither loud nor quiet, "You see me now?" A surge of terror shot through my chest. I knew that voice. It wasn't unfamiliar. It had been there before, buried in the edge of my hearing, in the hum of silence, in the back of my dreams. Theo yanked the door open, and we ran. We didn't stop running until we reached the street. The city was alive, cars, people, distant sirens. Normal. But my body still felt like it was trapped in that freezing air, that unnatural darkness. Theo paced, rubbing his arms. "Ilara, what the hell was that?" I shook my head, trying to breathe, trying to think. I don't. And then suddenly it clicked. I did know, not completely. Not why, not how, but when. This hadn't started in the apartment. It started in my aunt's observatory. The scent of ozone, the weight in the air, the way she avoided the main room, as if there was something inside it she refused to acknowledge. It had been there all along, and I had brought it with me. We went to my aunt's house the next day. She was older now, her sharp, intelligent eyes dulled by age but still keen enough to recognize my expression the moment she saw me. "You've seen him," she said. My stomach turned. "You knew?" She exhaled, her fingers twitching against the armrest of her chair. "I was hoping you wouldn't." Theo crossed his arms. "What is it?" She was quiet for a long time. Then finally she spoke. "It's called an observer." The word sent a shiver down my spine. I thought back to the forum, the nameless users describing shaded figures with wide-brimmed hats. "They don't haunt houses," I murmured. "They haunt people." My aunt nodded. "They don't always show themselves. Most people go their whole lives never realizing they're being watched. But once you notice them..." She hesitated, then met my gaze. "They don't let you forget." My mouth felt dry. "So what does it want?" Aunt Ruth shook her head. "No one really knows. Some think it just watches, that it feeds off of being seen. Others..." She hesitated. "Others say it waits until the moment you're weakest, until you're alone." The words settled heavily between us. I thought about my mother's house, about how I had spent so many nights alone in my apartment, trying to ignore the feeling of something standing just out of sight. Theo's voice was quiet. "How do we get rid of it?" My aunt's expression darkened. "You don't." I haven't been back to the apartment since that night. I packed what I could, moved in with Theo temporarily. But I know it doesn't matter, because it isn't the place that's haunted. It's me. And sometimes in the stillness of early morning, when the world is quiet and the air feels too heavy, I know it's still watching, waiting. And one day, when the moment is right, it will step out of the shadows again. I have always believed that places hold on to memories, not just in the way a dusty attic keeps the scent of old books or how an abandoned house carries the weight of its forgotten inhabitants. Some places feel as though they are waiting, watching, preserving, something unseen. The library where I worked was one of those places. It was an old, sprawling building in the historic district of town, its stone facade weathered from over a century of wind and rain. The ceiling stretched high, adorned with intricate moldings, and the shelves loomed tall, packed with books whose spines bore the weight of time. It had been a home once, long before it became a library. The Ashmore family had lived here, their wealth evident in the grand staircase and the velvet drapes that still hung in some of the study rooms. But no matter how much restoration had been done, the air inside never felt quite right. There was always something lingering. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. The occasional shiver along my spine, the feeling of being watched when I locked up at night. The way the overhead lamps flickered in the west wing, even after the wiring had been checked and rechecked. I tried to ignore it. Then Sage started coming around. Sage had been my best friend since college. She was the kind of person who could read a room before she even stepped inside. Sensitive, intuitive, a little odd in ways that made people wary of her. She called it a gift. Others called it unsettling. The first time she visited me at the library, she barely stepped through the door before stopping, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. I forced a laugh. "Feel what?" She turned, scanning the room, her eyes darting to the farthest corner of the main hall, the one where the old fireplace stood unused for decades. "There's something here," she murmured. "Something old." I shrugged. "Of course there is. The place is ancient." But she wasn't talking about the building. Sage started visiting more often, always lingering near the same spots. She would trace her fingers along the wooden railing of the staircase, stop abruptly, in doorways as if listening for something. Then, one evening as we sat in the break room sipping tea, she spoke without looking at me. "You know someone is watching you, right?" The words sent a chill through me. I set my cup down carefully. "Sage, don't start." "I mean it," she insisted. "Every time I come here, I feel them. There's one in particular, a man." I swallowed. "A man?" She nodded. "Tall, gaunt. He doesn't look like he belongs here, but he stays close to you, almost like he's waiting." I felt a prickle at the back of my neck. "Waiting for what?" Sage shook her head. "I don't know." That night I stayed late, closing up after the last few visitors had gone. The library was eerily silent, the usual hum of distant traffic muffled by the thick stone walls. I moved through the aisles, checking that the books were in order, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Then, as I reached the back of the main hall, I saw him. At first I thought he was a shadow cast by the dim lighting, but he was too solid, too real. A tall, pale man stood near the fireplace, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on me. His dark hair was neatly combed, but his face was gaunt, hollow in a way that suggested he had not belonged to the world of the living for some time. His clothes were old, out of place. A velvet coat worn at the edges, the kind you'd expect to see in portraits from a forgotten century. And around his neck, hanging from a tarnished chain, was a small silver locket. I couldn't move. My breath felt trapped in my throat as we stared at each other. Then slowly he lifted a hand and gestured, not toward me, toward the far corner of the room where the shadows stretched unnaturally long. A warning. I blinked, and he was gone. I barely slept that night. The image of the man haunted me. His eyes, dark and knowing, the way he had pointed, toward something unseen. I told myself I was imagining things, that working late combined with Sage's eerie warnings had gotten into my head. But the next night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt it again, the weight of a presence. I turned my head toward the window, my breath hitching. He was there, standing just beyond the glass, his figure barely illuminated by the street lamp's glow, watching me. I wanted to scream, to move, but something held me frozen in place. And then softly he raised his hand. Not in a threat. A warning. I didn't understand. But as the silence in my room stretched, thick and suffocating, my lips parted. And without meaning to, I whispered a name I shouldn't have known. Azrael. The moment the name left my lips, the man's expression shifted. Sorrow, recognition. And then, he was gone. Vanished into the night, leaving me with nothing but the suffocating weight of his absence. The next morning, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I started researching the library's past, and the name Azrael appeared more times than I was ready to accept. I spent the next morning buried in the library archives, searching for something, anything that could explain what had happened the night before. Azrael. The name had come from my lips unbidden, like it had been waiting beneath the surface of my mind for the right moment to slip free. I had never known an Azrael, never read about one, never heard the name spoken in passing. And yet, when I had seen him standing outside my window, something deep in my bones had recognized him. I started with the library's history. Most of what I already knew was common knowledge. The building had once been the Ashmore family estate before being donated to the city after a tragic fire in the late 1800s. No one had died in the fire, at least according to the records, but the family had left the property soon after, and their name faded into the past. But the deeper I dug, the more I found things that didn't add up. There were gaps in the historical records, names scratched out, dates that didn't align. There were whispers of disappearances, brief mentions of missing servants, unexplained, events that never made it into official reports. And then, finally I found it. A ledger, dated 1879, a list of Ashmore family staff. And at the bottom, in ink that had faded to a ghostly gray, Azrael Mercer. I leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering. The name wasn't common. It wasn't the kind of thing I could dismiss as coincidence. I turned the page carefully, my fingers trembling. There was only a brief mention of him, a caretaker, hired to manage the estate grounds. No date of birth, no listed family. And beside his name, written in small, slanted script, was a single word. Deceased. The date was missing. I ran a fingertip over the ink, the words nearly worn away by time. A man who had died in this house, this library. A man whose name I had spoken as if I had known him. I forced myself to keep reading, scanning the brittle pages for anything else. Then I found it. A second ledger from the year after. Azrael Mercer's name was still there, still listed under caretaker, no longer marked as deceased. A chill crawled up my spine. Someone had written him off as dead, only for his name to reappear the next year, as if nothing had happened. Had it been a mistake? A clerical error? Or had someone tried to erase him, only for him to return? I stared at the name until the letters blurred. Azrael had been real. He had lived here, walked these halls long before they became a library. And if Sage was right, if the man I had seen wasn't a hallucination, then maybe he had never truly left. I didn't tell Sage what I had found. Not yet. Something told me I needed to understand more before I said anything. Instead, I went back to my routine. I worked my shifts. I shelved books. I convinced myself that if I ignored what had happened, if I pretended not to see, then maybe Azrael wouldn't return. But he did. The second time, it was late. I was alone in the main hall, locking up for the night, when I felt it. That strange, suffocating stillness. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing at the far end of the room near the fireplace. Azrael, His expression was unreadable, his posture too still, like he was caught between presence and absence. The velvet coat he wore looked darker tonight, almost black in the dim light. His silver locket caught the faint glow of the lamps, glinting as he tilted his head. I wanted to run. Instead, I took a slow step forward. He didn't move, didn't speak, but then his hand lifted. He wasn't pointing this time. He placed his palm flat against his chest, right over the locket. And then, his lips parted, and, though no sound came, I understood. Stay inside. The words weren't spoken aloud, but I heard them. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Why? He didn't answer. He just lowered his hand, his gaze dark, filled with something I couldn't name. Then he was gone. One moment there, the next vanished, leaving only the echo of his warning behind. I didn't stay inside. I told myself I wouldn't let this thing, whatever it was, dictate my life. So, that night I left. I went for a walk, circling the block near my apartment, my coat pulled tight against the cold. The street lamps flickered as I passed, my shadow stretching long and thin across the pavement. And then, a figure in the distance. Not Azrael. Something else. It stood at the far end of the street just beyond the reach of the nearest lamp. Tall, motionless, watching. A horrible, creeping dread spread through my limbs. This was not the same presence. Azrael had felt strange, yes, unnatural, unsettling. But this was wrong. This was something that wanted me to see it. Something that was waiting for me to step forward. A sickening realization settled over me. Azrael hadn't told me to stay inside because of himself. He had been warning me about something else. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my apartment, the door locked behind me, my chest heaving. For a long time, I just stood there listening. Nothing followed me. But I knew deep down that whatever was out there wasn't gone. And worse, it had been waiting for me to leave. I didn't sleep that night. Even with my apartment door locked, the curtains drawn and every light on, I felt watched. I kept hearing echoes of Azrael's silent warning in my head. Stay inside. It hadn't been a suggestion. It had been a plea. But I had ignored him. And now, something else knew I was aware of it. I sat curled up on my couch, knees pulled to my chest, Poe perched on the armrest beside me. He hadn't left my side since I ran home. Every so often, he let out a low, guttural croak, his head twitching toward the window. I refused to look, because I knew, if I did, I would see something standing outside. Morning came slow and colorless, the sky overcast and thick with fog. I left for work like nothing had happened, but my nerves were frayed, my body tense with exhaustion. The whole walk to the library, I felt the weight of something just behind me, just outside my field of vision. I refused to turn around. When I arrived, Sage was already there, leaning against the front desk with her arms crossed. The moment she saw me, her expression darkened. "You look like hell." "Thanks." She ignored my sarcasm. "What happened?" I hesitated. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to spill every awful, crawling feeling, every flicker of movement in the dark, the soundless warnings, the thing that had waited for me beyond the street lamp. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I shook my head. Just didn't sleep well. Sage didn't believe me, but she didn't press, at least not right away. She let the conversation drop, but I saw the way her eyes flicked around the library, like she was listening for something I couldn't hear. That evening, I found myself in the archives again. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Something about Azrael, maybe. Something about whatever else was out there. The records were incomplete, pages missing or redacted, entire years erased, as if someone had tried to wipe the estate's past clean. But in an old, crumbling notebook, hidden beneath layers of forgotten documents, I found something. A journal entry, dated October 1880. The handwriting was neat but hurried, ink smudged, in places. The figure appeared again tonight. It stands beyond the trees, its shape wrong, its eyes absent. Mercer has warned us to stay indoors, but the others do not listen. They think it is a trick of the fog. They think it is nothing. But I see it, and I know it is waiting. My fingers tightened on the page. Mercer. Asriel Mercer. He had been warning them too. I flipped through the notebook, my pulse quickening. Another entry, dated 2 weeks later. The house is emptying. Those who went outside have not returned. Mercer has not left his room in days. He speaks little, but I heard him whispering last night. A name, over and over. I dare not repeat it. But I fear that it is listening. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The journal ended abruptly. No conclusion, no final entry. Just silence, as if the writer had simply stopped existing. I sat back, heart pounding, hands clammy against the brittle pages. Someone else had seen it. Someone else had ignored Asriel's warnings and paid the price. That night I didn't go straight home. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed at the library, long after closing, walking the aisles, touching the old books, like they might anchor me to something real. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that whatever had happened to those people, to Asriel, to the writer of that journal, it was in the past. I told myself that I was safe. But then, the air shifted. The overhead lights flickered and something knocked on the window. I froze. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. The knock came again, soft, measured. Not the wind, not a tree branch, something deliberate. I turned my head slowly, and there, beyond the glass, a figure stood in the fog, tall, too still, watching. The dim street lamp barely illuminated its shape, but I knew immediately. This was not Asriel. Asriel had always looked human. He was unsettling, unnatural, but his shape belonged to this world. This thing did not. Its body was too long, its limbs slightly out of proportion, and its face. There was nothing where its eyes should have been. Just hollow, stretching darkness. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure tilted its head. Not like a person, like learning how to mimic one. My stomach twisted, then just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and vanished into the fog. I didn't remember leaving the library. One moment I was standing there, staring at the empty space where it had been. The next I was inside my apartment, locking the door, my fingers shaking too hard to turn the deadbolt on the first try. Poe let out a sharp, rasping croak from his perch, flapping his wings once before settling. For a long time, I just stood there. My mind replayed the image over and over. That empty face, the way it had tilted its head, the way it had knocked as if testing something, as if waiting. And then, an awful realization crept into my bones. It hadn't tried to come inside. It hadn't needed to, because it already knew where I lived. The knock came again, a slow, deliberate sound like knuckles against wood. Except that wasn't possible. The bedroom had no balcony, no fire escape, nothing that could explain how something had reached that window. Poe hissed low in his throat, his claws digging into my shoulder. Sage's grip on my wrist tightened, her breathing shallow. We didn't move, didn't speak. For a long moment, the apartment was deathly still. Then, softly, we heard it. A scraping sound, like nails dragging down the glass. I forced myself to move, grabbing Sage by the arm and pulling her away from the hallway toward the front door. "We have to leave," I whispered. Sage hesitated. "Elara, we don't know." "I don't care," I cut her off. "We are not staying here." Another knock. This time it came from inside the bedroom. My stomach lurched, we ran. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers trembling. Sage was pressed against me, her breath ragged. Finally, the deadbolt gave, and the door swung open. The moment we stepped, outside the pressure lifted. The apartment felt different from the other side of the threshold, like we had just walked through an invisible barrier. The suffocating weight that had filled the air was gone. I turned back, and in the darkness of my apartment, just beyond the window, I saw it. The figure stood in my bedroom, its body flickering in and out of focus, like it couldn't quite hold its shape. It was taller now, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, and its face, the hollowness where its eyes should have been, seemed to pull at the air around it, bending the shadows inward. It was looking at me, waiting, but it didn't move. Something was holding it back. And then I saw why. Azrael. He stood between me and the thing, his gaunt figure barely visible against the dim light. His silver locket gleamed at his throat, his expression unreadable. His lips parted. I couldn't hear him, but I understood. Go. I grabbed Sage's hand, and we ran. We didn't stop until we were halfway down the street, breathless and shaking. Only then did I turn back. From the outside, my apartment looked completely normal. The bedroom window was empty, no shadow, no flickering figure, nothing. But I knew it was still there. I didn't go back. Not that night, not the next day. I packed what I could, stayed at Sage's place, and within a week I broke my lease. I left the apartment behind, the silver cross still tucked into my pocket. The figure never followed me. I felt the absence of it immediately. No more cold spots, no more flickering lights, no more silence that listened. But something else was missing too. Azrael. I never saw him again, not outside my window, not in the library, not anywhere. It was like the moment I left, he had vanished with it. And for the first time since this all started, I felt a deep, aching guilt. I had begged him to leave, and now he is gone. Months passed. I moved to a new apartment, one with bright windows and open spaces, somewhere that never felt too still. I never told anyone the full story. Sage knew enough. And Poe never left my side. I still worked at the library, but I avoided the archives. I avoided the fireplace, the shadows near the stairwell, the feeling that something had once lingered there. Until one evening, as I was closing up, I felt it. Not the suffocating weight, not the lurking presence. Something else, something light, something watching. I turned toward the old fireplace. For the briefest second, I swore I saw the outline of a man, a dark coat, a glint of silver at his throat. Then he was gone. I didn't speak, didn't move. Just closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The room was quiet, but I could have sworn, just for a moment, I felt a hand brush against my shoulder. A silent farewell. Then the weight lifted, and I was alone. The heat was unbearable. It had been weeks since the last rain, and the air felt thick, pressing down on everything like a weight. The ground was cracked and dry, the reservoir almost completely gone, reduced to a wasteland of hardened mud and skeletal tree roots. That's how Finley and I ended up here, following a half-formed dirt path toward the sunken chapel. We'd heard the stories. Everyone had. The town flooded the valley decades ago, but no one could explain why the water rose so fast. Some said it wasn't supposed to happen at all, that the reservoir had been created under strange circumstances. People whispered that the church bells rang even as the water swallowed the spire, that the congregation never truly left. We didn't believe in ghosts, but when the water dried up and the chapel reappeared, standing eerily intact in the middle of the cracked earth, we couldn't ignore it. As we walked, the silence became overwhelming. No wind, no insects, just the sound of our boots crunching against the dry ground. Then we saw it. The chapel stood at the lowest point of the drained reservoir, its stone dark with water stains. The rusted iron gate that had once enclosed a small courtyard was half sunken in mud. The spire tilted slightly, as if straining toward something unseen. It should have been ruined. Instead, it looked untouched. Neither of us spoke as we made our way down the final stretch of path. Something about the stillness felt unnatural, The chapel door was massive, warped from years of water damage. I expected it to be locked, stuck, or at least require some effort to budge. Instead, when I pressed my hand against the wood, it swung open immediately. The air inside was thick and damp. It smelled of stagnant water and old earth, a scent that clung to the back of my throat. I expected rot and ruin, collapsed beams, shattered stained glass. But nothing inside had fallen apart. The pews were water-stained but unbroken. The altar still stood, draped in cloth that should have disintegrated years ago. Even the brass candle holders remained in place, untouched by rust. Finley hesitated just inside the doorway. This place should be collapsing. I ran my fingers along the back of a pew. The wood felt smooth, preserved. Then, a sound. A deep metallic clang echoed through the chapel. We both froze. It had come from somewhere inside, but the acoustics made it impossible to tell exactly where. I swallowed, hard. "Did you hear that?" Finley nodded, his face pale. We moved toward a side chamber where old wooden pews and religious artifacts had been stacked haphazardly. Finley brushed dust off a wooden cross, turning it over in his hands. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, dragging against the stone floor. Not ours. We stood perfectly still, listening. The footsteps continued, moving from the center of the chapel toward the entrance. Then something passed through the light. A shadowed figure, its form dark and dripping, glided along the far wall. It moved like something shifting through water, rather than air, slow and deliberate. It was too tall, its shoulders unnaturally hunched, its arms long and motionless at its sides. Finley exhaled sharply. I felt his hand grip my arm, but I couldn't move. The figure didn't turn toward us. It continued to the open door. And then, without warning, the door slammed shut. A deep, shuddering boom that shook the air. And suddenly, the silence returned. Thick, suffocating. We were trapped inside. Neither of us spoke. I pressed my ear against the door, listening, but there was nothing outside. No wind, no movement, just stillness. "We need to get out of here," Finley whispered. I nodded, gripping the handle. It was ice cold. I pulled. The door wouldn't budge. Panic crept into my chest. I tried again, putting my full weight into it. Nothing. Behind us, something shifted. A soft, wet drip, 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 like water falling from soaked fabric. Finley grabbed my wrist. "We're leaving. Now." We turned toward the narrow windows, but the glass was too thick to break, the frames too small to squeeze through. Another drip, closer. I turned my head just enough to see the farthest pews. Dark, wet streaks stained the stone floor, leading from the altar toward us. Then, a single footprint appeared in the dust. Right beside us. We ran. I don't remember getting the door open. I don't know if I forced it or if something let us go. All I know is that 1 second we were inside, trapped, suffocating under the weight of something unseen. And the next, we were outside, sprinting up the cracked path toward the car. Sunlight was blinding after the damp dimness of the chapel. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop running. We didn't speak until we reached the vehicle. Only then did I turn back. The chapel was still there, standing silent in the dried-out reservoir. But something was different. The door. It was wide open again, and deep in the shadows of the doorway, something watched us leave. I could feel it, the heavy, suffocating presence lingering in the stillness, waiting.